Imagine a dark night in Iraq. Soldiers scanning the sky through thermal cameras when something impossible appears. Not a drone, not a plane, but a floating jellyfish, pulsing with heat, gliding without wings, and diving into a lake before shooting straight back into the sky. No engine, no sound. Living like glow, drifting through darkness. From Iraq to Peru, China to Georgia, the same shape keeps appearing, a global whisper that something unknown is moving above us. The Jellyfish UAP is not a story, it's a warning. Look up. The truth is gliding silently overhead. Chapter 1. The night the sky breathed. The desert has a way of holding silence in its hands, as if it were something fragile, something precious. And on nights when the wind decides to sleep and the world forgets to make a sound, that silence becomes almost comforting, alive. On one such night, in the late months of 2017, the land around Al-Taqaddum Air Base in Iraq seemed to exhale in one long, quiet breath. The kind you barely notice unless you're paying attention. The kind that makes the stars shimmer softer, as if they, too, are listening. Most people imagine military nights as loud, sharp, and urgent. But the truth is, many are slow, meditative, stretched thin across hours where nothing moves except drifting dust. Inside a small monitoring cabin attached to the base's aerostat system, several soldiers settled into another long shift. Thermal screens glowed. Instruments hummed. Coffee cooled in metal cups, and the desert, wide and ancient, curled around the base like a sleeping giant. They'd seen everything the sky usually offered. Wandering birds, distant jets arcing across the horizon, the slow rise of heat plumes from far-off vehicles. But this night felt different, not dramatic, just slightly tuned to another frequency, one they wouldn't understand until later. For now, they were simply tired, hoping for an uneventful shift, their eyes resting softly on the glowing screens. And then, without sound or warning, the sky breathed. It began as a faint smudge on the thermal feed, a shape so subtle it blended into the background, no more significant than a drifting pocket of warm air. One operator leaned forward, squinting. He tapped the edge of the monitor. The smudge shifted, not sharply, not like a glitch, but smoothly, deliberately, like something alive turning its head. "What's that?" he murmured. Not alarmed, just curious, like a person watching a quiet ripple form on still water. Another operator rolled his chair closer. "Probably nothing," he said, though his tone betrayed intrigue. Isomed, in adjusted contrast. The shape hardened, a bulbous form, rounded, floating, trailing long extensions that drifted behind it like strands in slow water. The first operator tilted his head. "That doesn't look like anything I've seen before." "Yeah," the second said softly. "Same here. There are moments when something small, a shadow, a sound, a shape, brushes the edges of your understanding, not forcefully, but gently. This was one of those moments. The object wasn't fast, bright, or aggressive. It simply existed, in a place where things like it weren't supposed to exist. At first, the men watched with professional detachment. Tracking objects was routine, but the longer they stared, the quieter the room seemed to become, as if it were holding its breath. The object drifted with an unsettling grace, neither carried by the wind nor resisting it. It floated between 850 and 2,200 feet, moving with soft, dreamlike intention. Its head glowed warmly in the thermal feed, pulsing gently. Not like an engine, not like any known heat source. Something in between. Something unpredictable. And those appendages, 4, maybe 5, stiff, controlled, trailing behind without flapping, curling, or responding to turbulence. "Is that heat?" one soldier whispered. "Kind of," the other replied, "but not really." Its thermal signature flipped between warm and cold with no pattern they recognized. Balloons don't pulse. Glitches don't float calmly. Drones don't drift like creatures sleepwalking. Outside, the desert wind brushed the aerostat cable. Inside, Only the hum of machinery filled the room. Even their thoughts seemed to quiet. Try locking onto it. The targeting system word focused and missed. The object slipped away. Clean. Effortless. Again. Same result. The mysterious shape drifted through the crosshair like smoke. Night vision. Click. Nothing. Visual spectrum. Another click. Nothing. It existed only in infrared. A presence defined by heat and absence of heat. A ghost, visible only in a spectrum humans weren't meant to see. One younger soldier leaned back. Feels like it's playing hide and seek. The older operator smiled faintly. Things don't play. They just are. The object floated onward, unaffected by drifting clouds. Calm, purposeful, dreamlike. Where's it heading? Toward the Lake Habbaniyah. A dark, mirror-flat surface at night. A perfect void. The object descended slowly, pulsing softly, drifting lower as though settling into a place it belonged. The operators leaned in, breath slowed. The world seemed to hush. The object touched the surface. No splash. No ripple. Not even a tremor. It simply slipped beneath the water, smooth, complete, soundless, underwater. Someone whispered, "It's gone." They waited. Seconds. Minutes. The lake remained a flat, black void. 17 long minutes passed. Confusion softened into awe. Then, like something waking beneath a blanket, the object emerged. It shot upward at a perfect 45-degree angle. No spray. No turbulence. No sign it had ever touched the water. It resumed drifting as if nothing had happened. "How?" one whispered. No one answered. The object glided until it slipped out of view, vanishing into the quiet night. The room stayed still for a long moment. Finally, one soldier rubbed his eyes and whispered, "Well, that was something." They didn't know it yet, but this quiet sighting, this drifting, impossible thing, would ripple across the world. It would echo in documentaries, podcasts, late-night conversations, scientific debates, and online theories. A soft shape in the night would awaken a global curiosity far larger than the tiny cabin it first appeared in. But for now, it was just for men, a glowing screen, and the sense that the night had shown them something rare. Outside, the desert exhaled again. Slow, gentle, as if closing its eyes, and the sky, vast, ancient, patient, kept its secrets a little longer. The shape they witnessed that night was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The first stirring of the unseen. The morning after the call feels strangely delicate, as though the world is balancing on a thin thread of silence. I wake before dawn, long before the sky gathers even its first hint of color. It isn't a jolt or a gasp that pulls me from sleep, just a slow, gentle rising like being lifted by warm air from below. My eyes open naturally, peacefully, as though they've been waiting. The room is dim. The edges of furniture soften into the shadows, and for a moment, everything looks slightly rearranged, as if a quiet hand brushed through the space while I slept. I sit up and listen. The world outside hasn't begun yet. No birds, no cars, not even the distant static of life warming awake. It has the kind of silence that feels deliberate, intentional, like the universe is holding its breath and watching to see what I'll do next. I breathe deeply, reminded of the strange warmth that filled the room last night. It's gone now, but a trace of it remains inside my chest. A small ember still glowing. It doesn't frighten me. It feels familiar. Familiar. Like an echo of something I should remember but don't. I turn to the window. Condensation softens the glass, transforming the outside world into a hazy watercolor. A sliver of pale blue stretches across the horizon, the faintest promise of a new day. The sky is unusually clear, as if the night spent hours sweeping it clean. For a moment, I wonder if the Shima I saw will return, but the sky stays still. Empty. Calm. I rise slowly, my feet grounding on the cool floor. The air holds a faint charge, like the atmosphere before lightning, though no storm is coming. It brushes my skin in subtle tingles, as if an invisible current is passing through the room. Not threatening, just present. A reminder that whatever visited the night before wasn't a dream. I walk to the window and press my fingers to the glass. It's colder than it should be. Beneath the surface, I feel a soft vibration barely there, like a distant hum buried under the quiet. For a few seconds, my heartbeat syncs with it, perfectly aligned, before returning to its usual rhythm. Pay attention. That's what the moment feels like it's whispering. Outside, the world slowly takes shape. Trees rise in dark silhouettes. Houses stand silent. The street lies untouched, holding the stillness of a world not yet awake. And as I look toward the horizon, a feeling returns. Not a picture, but a sensation. The sensation of being noticed. It reminds me of late-night testimonies I've read. People who said they felt something before they saw anything, a shift in the air, a pull, an unseen presence brushing the edges of awareness. I used to wonder whether those stories were exaggerations. Now, standing in this hushed morning, I understand them more than I expected. I step away from the window. The room feels vivid, as if every surface has gained a layer of clarity overnight. Shadows look deeper. Colors look fuller. Even my breaths sound different, like the air wants to carry them somewhere. I decide to go outside. The door creaks open, releasing a cool breeze that drifts over my skin. The morning air feels fresh yet strangely dense, as if carrying more substance than usual. The sky glows softly with dawn blue and early gold. I walk to the edge of the yard. Dew chills my feet. The horizon looks quiet enough to believe nothing unusual ever touched it. Yet, as I stand there, the memory of last night's shimmering lights sharpens. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't a plane. It moved like a message written in motion. Was it real? I whisper. The morning doesn't answer, but the memory refuses to fade. Dreams dissolve quickly, slipping through the cracks of waking thought. But this stays rooted, clear, as though it belongs more to the world than to my imagination. As I stand there, a question rises gently inside me. What if last night wasn't the beginning, but the continuation of something I hadn't noticed until now? The thought sends warmth through my chest, the same calm warmth I felt in the darkness. Not fear, not anticipation. Just a quiet curiosity expanding within me. I sit on the small bench by the yard and close my eyes. Sometimes the unseen speaks best when the eyes aren't trying so hard to understand. The breeze comes in soft waves. The faint hum I felt indoors returns lighter now, like a whisper at the edge of thought. I wait. There is no rush. The morning holds its patience. And then, a feeling rises. Not a voice or a vision. Just a gentle knowing, a soft impression that the night reached out. Because something in me had already been reaching toward it. It through my research, my late-night questions, my unspoken wonderings. Maybe the call wasn't accidental. Maybe I had been listening for it long before it arrived. A rustle stirs at the edge of the trees, a bird waking. The sound breaks the silence in a way that feels like permission for the world to start again. Slowly, the morning unfolds. Chirps, footsteps, distant life returning. The quiet moment slips away, but it leaves something behind. A sense of connection. A calm awareness. The feeling that the unknown didn't pass by accidentally. I rise and look once more at the horizon. The sky is fully awake now, bright and ordinary. Nothing shimmering. Nothing strange. Nothing to explain the night before. Yet the feeling remains soft, but undeniable. The unseen isn't always visible. Sometimes it's felt first. I return inside with quiet steps. I don't know what the day will bring, but something in me knows the night will come with questions again. Perhaps with warmth, perhaps with silence, perhaps something more. For now, I carry the memory of the shimmer like a small secret tucked gently into my thoughts. Not heavy, not frightening. Just waiting, like a page in a story not yet turned. And deep in that calm, one truth settles. Something has begun, and beginnings, once they awaken, rarely stay silent for long. Chapter 3. The Descent into Water. There is a certain kind of silence that only water can hold. Not the quiet of a dark room or the hush of a desert night, but a deeper stillness, the kind that bends sound, slows thought, and makes the world feel suspended. It is the silence of a midnight lake, when the surface lies smooth as glass, and every ripple seems to hesitate before daring to exist. On the night I first imagined it, that silence stretched across continents to a small stretch of water in Iraq, Lake Habbaniyah, where it met something wholly unexpected. The desert air was crisp, tinged with the faint taste of earth and sand. Above, the stars arranged themselves in slow, patient constellations, unchanging and ancient. In the monitoring cabin, soldiers watched the night the way only trained eyes can alert to every flicker of movement, every shift in shadow. Their thermal screens cast a soft orange glow across weary faces as they followed the strange shape hovering above the lake. It moved with a grace that ignored every expectation, and as it drifted lower toward the dark surface, an unnatural hush settled over the room, so complete even the soldiers' breathing felt intrusive. The object behaved like something aware, not reacting, but responding to its surroundings. Its bulbous head glimmered faintly in infrared, pulsing in uneven rhythms, while stiff, trailing appendages moved with a calm precision. None of the soldiers spoke. They simply watched, caught between disbelief and wonder, as if hypnotized by the object's fluid motion. The lake below seemed to recognize its visitor. It surfaced, usually brushed by desert winds, stilled entirely, as if holding its breath. Shadows blended seamlessly into the water, creating an almost perfect reflection of the descending form. No ripples, no displacement, no physical logic acknowledged what was unfolding. Only the soft flicker of thermal light marked the place where two realms, air and water, prepared to meet. Slowly, almost ceremonially, the object lowered itself toward the lake. There was no splash, no ripple, no visible disturbance. It simply glided into the surface, as though the boundary between air and water did not apply to it. The appendages followed in perfect sequence. For a heartbeat, the soldiers looked at one another, their expressions mirroring the same quiet realization. They were witnessing something that did not belong to their understanding of physics or reality. Then it touched the water, and vanished. For 17 minutes, the lake held nothing but silence. No thermal trace, no bubbles, no distortion. It was as though the water had swallowed a thought, not an object, something weightless, seamless, deliberate. The soldiers could do nothing but sit back and absorb the impossibility of the moment, each trying to reconcile what they'd seen with a world that had never prepared them for it. Time in the cabin stretched unnaturally. Seconds felt elongated. Minutes carried the weight of hours. The soft hum of equipment became a kind of lullaby, reminding them that their instruments still lived, even if their understanding did not. Some closed their eyes briefly, almost hoping the moment might rearrange itself into something explainable. Yet the absence of the object made its presence even more tangible. Something had passed through their world, quiet and intentional, and they felt it lingering in the air. And then, without warning, it returned. The object rose from the lake in one smooth, effortless motion. No water clung to it. No spray arced outward. No turbulence disturbed the surface. It emerged as cleanly as if the lake were only a thin veil it had slipped behind. The appendages trailed with the same slow precision. Its rounded head pulsed faintly, alive with thermal light. It climbed sharply into the sky, as though continuing a path briefly paused, not interrupted. Still, none of the soldiers spoke. Their breaths aligned, soft and restrained, as if acknowledging the moment required reverence rather than reaction. They understood instinctively that what they had seen could never be fully described, only remembered. Outside, the desert began to shift with the coming dawn. A breeze stirred, brushing the aerostat's tether and ruffling the balloon's thin skin. But the anomaly moved unhindered, untouched by wind or gravity's expectations. It drifted with an intelligence that defied prediction. Targets failed to lock. Crosshairs passed harmlessly through empty air. Their equipment struggled, but the object did not. In the silence, something emotional began to build. Not fear, not even confusion, but a gentle, expanding awe. It was the realization that the night and the water had shared a secret with them. The descent, the absolute stillness, the 17 underwater minutes, the immaculate return. These moments imprinted themselves onto the men's minds like a quiet rhythm, something they would recount only in safe, private moments for years to come. The lake returned to its perfect stillness, reflecting the growing pastels of dawn. Birds stirred, the desert exhaled, yet in the quiet spaces of memory, the event left a lingering mark. A reminder that the world still held mysteries, ones that bent rules and slipped elegantly through the cracks of understanding. The soldiers finally leaned back, exchanging wordless looks. Understanding was not the point, witnessing was, and they had witnessed something that felt less like an event and more like a message. As the sun climbed fully over the desert, another day began, ordinary in every visible way. But beneath that simplicity, a story had taken root, one that stretched far beyond the lake, beyond the desert, beyond anything the soldiers had expected from their service. Some moments aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be felt, and this one had been felt deeply, quietly, with the patience of water itself. This was only the first ripple, the beginning of something far larger than any of them understood. Chapter 4. Ghost Story of the Base. There are stories that don't begin with a word. They begin with a glance, a pause, or the shared silence between people who know they have witnessed something that does not quite belong to the world as they understand it. That night at Al-Taqadam Air Base, the strange shape in the sky, the one with the glowing, bulbous head and stiff, trailing appendages, was exactly that kind of story. It didn't arrive with a headline. It didn't announce itself with urgency. It simply existed, and the soldiers who saw it couldn't help but carry its memory with them. The base moved through its usual nocturnal rhythm, machines humming, muted footsteps crossing the sand, quiet chatter drifting in the gaps between larger operations. But inside the cabin where the thermal feed had captured the anomaly, the air felt subtly altered. A quiet pressure hung there, like the afterimage of a bright light against darkened eyes. Every look toward, the sky felt different now. Every shadow seemed slightly more alive, and when the men spoke about what they had seen, their words came slowly, measured, as if handling something fragile. The story began to drift through the base, like a ghost. Not through official briefings or reports, but through hushed conversations in narrow hallways, over lukewarm coffee in the mess hall, and during long shifts staring into the desert night. Someone would mention a glimmer in the thermal feed. Another would nod, remembering the silent descent into the lake and the flawless rise back out. With each retelling, the story didn't grow more dramatic. It grew deeper, layered with quiet wonder and attention no one could quite name. No one wanted to call it a UFO. The word felt too heavy, too dramatic. But privately, when no one else was listening, many admitted that that's exactly what it felt like. Something unknown, something that defied the rules, something that moved with the awareness of being watched yet indifferent to the watchers. And like any ghost story, its power lived in the moments between A soldier walking past the tents under the soft wash of floodlights would suddenly remember the jellyfish-like shape, the way it hovered as though gravity didn't apply. A gentle chill would brush his skin, not fear, but recognition. The world had shown him something impossible, and that glimpse refused to fade. Some of the quieter men started noticing patterns in the base itself. Shadows moved strangely under the starlight, as if aware of the eyes tracking them. The wind shifted in soft, deliberate ways, nudging attention toward the empty sky where the object had appeared. Even the distant clatter of supply trucks seemed to fall into a rhythm, mechanical pulses echoing the slow, deliberate heartbeat of something unseen. Every ordinary sound felt like the background of a story still unfolding. Some nights, a few soldiers gathered near the cabin where the thermal screens glowed faintly. They leaned back in their chairs, letting the low hum of electronics fill the silence, and talked quietly about the anomaly. One described the pulsing warmth of the bulbous head, almost like a living heartbeat. Another spoke of the rigid appendages, moving with a grace engineered for both air and water. No one ought to get No one forced explanations. They simply listened and carried the images back with them. Soon the story grew in the only direction. Stories like this came through feeling. Soldiers spoke not just about what they saw, but what they sensed. The calm certainty, the strange lack of threat, the unsettling awareness that the world had just shifted in a small but unforgettable way. Sometimes, in a whisper, someone would say, "It didn't belong here," but somehow it was allowed. And that single sentiment seemed to hold everything they couldn't put into words. Skeptics, of course, had their say. Bases always have them. Men who shrugged and muttered about thermal errors, sensor glitches, tricks of exhaustion. Their doubts were welcome. They kept the story grounded. But even the skeptics felt the dissonance. The 17 minutes underwater, the silent emergence, the gliding ascent. Their rational explanations couldn't quite hold. As days passed, the ghost stories spread quietly across the base. Soldiers who hadn't witnessed it firsthand heard whispers from those who had. The story developed a subtle cadence, not built from facts, but from shared perception. It lived as much in the spaces between words as in the words themselves. A quiet camaraderie formed among those who had seen the object. They didn't need validation or belief. They only needed the understanding that something extraordinary had brushed past their ordinary lives. And somehow, that was enough. The object itself began to take on life in their memories, not as a threat, not as a machine, not even necessarily as something extraterrestrial, but as a presence. Something patient. Something aware. Something moving according to rules the soldiers were never meant to understand. They imagined it gliding through the sky, descending into water without a ripple, moving with an intelligence, expressed not in language, but in silence. Even senior officers, usually grounded in strict practicalities, spoke of it in softer tones. They referenced it obliquely, as though acknowledging a moment that belonged to everyone and no one. The story wasn't classified. It wasn't officially recorded, but it carried weight, as if the desert itself had accepted it into its long memory. And still, outside, the desert moved on nights passing, stars shifting, the lake returning to its perfectly ordinary reflection. But the memory lingered, a ripple not in the water, but in the minds of those who'd seen too much to ignore. Over the following weeks, the ghost story became a quiet source of fascination, a reminder in the monotony of duty that the world was bigger, stranger, and more intricate than any manual could teach. Soldiers shared the tale with newcomers, letting them experience the soft awe of the unknown. It became a touchstone, a way to speak about mystery without naming it. Some nights, men wandered alone along the desert edge, looking up at the infinite sky, remembering the bulbous shape gliding above the lake. In those moments, the desert felt larger, more alive, as though it, too, remembered. The story was never embellished, never dramatized. It floated through the base like a quiet dream, an intersection of memory, imagination, and truth. And through it, the world became just a little more mysterious. Even now, long after the thermal feed has gone dark, long after the lake has returned to calm reflection, the ghost story persists. It lives in shared glances, knowing smiles, and in those quiet moments when someone pauses mid-thought, remembering what the sky once held. Operations continued. Routines resumed. The desert capped its silent vigil, but somewhere beneath the surface of ordinary life, the shape lingered, patient, present, waiting for those who still remembered. And in that presence, the world whispered a promise. Some stories aren't meant to be understood. Some are meant to linger softly, like the echo of a dream. And as that whisper drifted across the base, the world outside began to stir, carrying the first threads of a mystery that would soon reach far beyond the desert. Chapter 5. The colors of heat and shadow. The night returned, wearing its familiar cloak of quiet. Yet something within it had subtly changed. Not the desert itself, ever patient and still, nor the lake that mirrored the sky like a silent sentinel. The shift lived in perception, the way lights settled, the way shadows deepened, the way heat drifted through the air in uneven, almost deliberate pulses. Those who had witnessed the anomaly before now waited with careful curiosity, hearts attuned to the soft rhythms of something just beyond comprehension. Inside the cabin, the thermal screens cast their warm orange glow across the soldiers' faces. Watching them, had become a ritual, sitting in near silence, eyes fixed on the display, letting each flicker speak in its own language. And there it was, then hovering, drifting slowly, its rounded head rising and falling, as if breathing. Behind it, the appendages stretched in rigid grace, like fingers reaching for something invisible. What struck everyone most profoundly was the object's relationship with heat. It didn't radiate warmth randomly or predictably. Instead, it pulsed in subtle waves that felt almost intentional. One moment, its head flared bright white, blazing hot on the infrared feed. The next, it dimmed to deep black, a cold void folding inward. The appendages followed the same strange rhythm, defying the clean rules of thermodynamics with a calm, effortless disregard. There was no mechanical explanation, no exhaust plume, no fuel signature. Physics itself seemed to hesitate, gently held at bay by something unknown. The soldiers leaned closer, breaths slow. Some whispered under their breath quiet words that might have been prayers or attempts to anchor themselves in familiarity. "It's alive," one murmured. A few shook their heads, unsure if they agreed or wanted to. But deep down, all of them felt the same unspoken recognition. This object was moving in a language they had yet learned, speaking in colors and patterns that hinted at intelligence, intention, or a form of existence entirely foreign to them. Outside, the desert night remained serene. Stars shimmered overhead, patient and ancient. A breeze skimmed across the sand, too gentle to disturb the calm surface of the lake. But the air carried that subtle charge again, not electricity, not wind, something quieter, something akin to awareness, as if the environment itself had shifted to make room for the visitor. Watching the screen, the soldiers found their minds drifting in ways training never anticipated. They were used to measuring, quantifying, reducing unknowns into knowns. But this was not meant for measurement. It was meant to be witnessed, felt, more than analyzed. And as they watched, they began to notice the nuances. The way each color shift followed a rhythm, a soft, internal cadence. Hot, cold, warm, dim. A sequence that felt less like random fluctuation and more like a quiet melody. Was the object communicating, signaling, defending itself, hiding? Or was this simply how it lived, an organism or construct navigating the thresholds of temperature and shadow with an ease beyond human understanding? The questions came silently. None of them dared speak them aloud. Yet oddly, no one felt the need for answers. There is a kind of recognition that exists beyond explanation, a calm acceptance that something extraordinary has stepped briefly into view. And in that acceptance, a soft peace settled over the room. The object drifted across the infrared display with deliberate grace, its bulbous head tilted slightly, pulsing through its strange spectrum of hot and cold. The appendages streamed behind, moving with a fluidity that reminded some soldiers of deep-sea creatures gliding through dark water. It was both organic and mechanical, natural and engineered, simultaneously familiar and alien. Its precision was too perfect, its movement too effortless. It navigated the air as if it had been born to it. After a while, the soldiers found themselves imagining the sight without the screen seeing it, not as a heat signature, but as a real presence in the night sky. They pictured the rounded head glowing softly, the rigid tendrils trailing like some celestial jellyfish, the silent glide through air that denied everything they thought they understood. And as they pictured it, they felt themselves drawn deeper into a quiet wonder rarely experienced in the regimented world of the base. Outside, the world remained unchanged on the surface. The lake lay still, indifferent. The desert breathed in slow, ancient rhythms. The stars looked down without blinking. Yet for those watching inside the cabin, it felt as though everything had subtly rearranged itself, opening just enough to allow the extraordinary to exist alongside the ordinary. Soft conversations broke the silence, each word chosen carefully. "Do you think it knows we're watching?" one soldier whispered. No one answered, but the question lingered like dust in the air. Could presence itself be a form of intelligence? Could heat and shadow carry meaning? Could intention exist in something that didn't move like anything they'd ever known? The night stretched on in calm stillness. Time seemed to slow, curl, and fold around them, Observations became meditations. Each pulse on the screen became a heartbeat belonging to a world adjacent to their own. In that world, the laws of nature were not broken, they were simply broader, more flexible, allowing for possibilities humanity had never considered. By the time the first faint brush of dawn painted the horizon in lavender and gold, the object had begun to drift higher, rising slowly into the thinning darkness. Its thermal glow faded from the screens, not abruptly but gently, as if it were retreating into the morning light. The soldiers watched until the last trace vanished, then continued to stare at the empty feed, unwilling to let go of the moment. Even after the screens went dark, the cabin remained charged with a quiet, contemplative energy. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that had communicated not through words or sound, but through gradients of heat and shadow. Something that existed in the margins of understanding, yet left a mark deeper than explanation ever could. The colors had spoken, and though no one understood the language, all of them felt changed by it. Outside, the desert began to wake. Wind stirred lightly, carrying hints of warmth. The lake reflected the pastel sky, undisturbed. The world looked the same. It felt subtly expanded. The soldiers rose slowly, each carrying the memory like a small ember glowing just beneath the surface. They moved back into routine with quiet reverence, knowing the extraordinary had brushed against their lives once again. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the desert and the lake alike, one shared thought echoed among them. The world is larger, stranger, and more beautiful than they often allow themselves to see. And sometimes it pauses long enough for those who are watching to notice. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, another ripple of mystery began to stir, hinting that this night was part of a much greater pattern waiting patiently to reveal itself. Chapter 6. The Silent Dance of Observation. The desert, in its endless patience, teaches a kind of quiet that cities never could. At night, it listens. By day, it watches, and in those drifting spaces where human attention loosens, the world reveals itself in subtle, unhurried ways. In the nights that followed the first encounter with the floating anomaly, the soldiers at Al-Taqadum Air Base began to sense a rhythm that no instrument could quantify, something that lived in the thin space between perception and awareness. Inside the small observation cabin, the thermal screens hummed with soft warmth, casting orange light across faces sharpened by discipline and restless curiosity. The object hovered once more above the lake, drifting up and down in fluid arcs, tracing invisible paths through the night air. Its rounded head pulsed with an irregular, purposeful cadence and echo of a heartbeat suspended in the cold desert silence. Behind it, the appendages flowed like thoughtful tendrils, brushing against currents no one could see. Gradually, the soldiers began noticing subtleties that would have slipped past them on any ordinary night. The object seemed to respond to their focus slowing when they leaned forward, gliding more loosely when their whispers softened. It wasn't human consciousness. They knew better than to imagine that. But there was something about its motion, something about the way it inhabited the air, that suggested a kind of environmental awareness on attunement to the presence of other beings nearby. The quiet inside the cabin deepened into an intimacy of shared attention. No one spoke unless necessary. Words felt like interruptions in a language that didn't use sound. The rhythm of the object, the cooling and warming, the drifting and tilting became a shared vocabulary that each person understood instinctively but could never quite articulate. It was a dance of observation rather than interaction. A silent ballet in which every participant was present, yet profoundly removed. Outside, the desert stretched in dark velvet calm. Stars shimmered in still patterns overhead, their reflections faint in the lake's glassy surface. A breeze whispered over the sand, carrying the same subtle movement that accompanied the anomaly's glide. The world seemed to have aligned itself into a composition meant to be witnessed in silence. The desert, the lake, the wind, the sky, they all framed the anomaly in a slow, deliberate narrative that unfolded without urgency. The soldiers logged what they could: sketches, notes, thermal fluctuations, but even as they recorded every measurable detail, they felt the edges of their tools. No device could fully capture the cadence of the appendages, the breathing rhythm of the heat pulses, or the way the object retained perfect coherence through air and, before, water. They realized how limited their instruments were, how little technology could grasp the elegance before them. Instead of frustration, A calm curiosity settled among them. There is a difference between witnessing something dangerous and witnessing something profound. The latter softens the mind, invites patience, and allows mystery to exist without needing immediate answers. In that quiet contemplation, the soldiers were learning that difference. Time shifted in strange ways during those nights. Hours slipped past unnoticed, yet every moment felt densely filled, as if the object stretched each second into something deeper. Watching it became meditative. Each pulse of heat, each quiet glide, pressed itself into memory like a faint imprint on sand. Some soldiers found themselves murmuring toward the anomaly, though they knew it could not hear. "We see you," one whispered. "We're trying to understand." The words felt both unnecessary and inevitable part of a ritual forming around the act of observation itself. The object remained steady in its unpredictability. It hovered, drifted, moved with precise impossibility. The pulsing warmth suggested something olivore, something imitating life, while the controlled motion hinted at intention. It occupied a space between categories, neither fully organic nor fully mechanical, and it was that, in-between unsettling, beautiful, inclassifiable, that captured their attention most deeply. It reminded them that reality had layers hidden beneath everyday perception, layers visible only to those willing to sit in silence and simply observe. Outside, the desert seemed to echo this presence. The wind carried faint, nearly inaudible tones, like the land itself was breathing in rhythm with the anomaly. The stars held their positions with calm certainty, casting soft light over sand and water. The lake reflected the night sky with unbroken stillness, revealing nothing of the object, yet somehow absorbing the memory of its passage. The world seemed to hold its breath, allowing the anomaly to exist fully in its grace, witnessed by only a handful of human eyes. Quiet stories began circulating among the soldiers, small, fleeting observations that felt meaningful even if they couldn't be proven. One described the object dimming its heat, just as the moon slipped behind clouds. Another recalled how the tendrils shifted direction the moment the wind changed. These shared fragments created a collective awareness, an informal network of perception richer than any instrument. The anomaly had become a subtle instructor, teaching them to notice not only its movement, but the depth and texture of attentive silence. Yet beneath the calm, a thin thread of tension wound through the experience. The object reminded them gently but unmistakably that the universe was far larger than their frameworks allowed. Each pulse of heat, each impossible glide, whispered of a much greater scale of existence. They felt awe, not fear, the kind that made them feel small and exquisitely alive. Time grew fluid. Forces of habit logging data, writing observations, gave way to stillness. The soldiers simply watched, letting the object's rhythm settle into their minds. Its glow became a quiet tether, pulling their awareness into the present moment with rare clarity. Observation became participation. Attention became a soft, unspoken dialogue. Eventually, the object began to climb. Slowly, deliberately. It traced arcs across the sky that defied intuition, its pulsating head marking soft intervals of heat and cold, like a quiet language spoken in light. The appendages billowed behind in fluid motion, steering it with impossible finesse. It moved without sound, without effort, and in that silent ascent there was a message layered deeper than words. That presence alone could communicate. That existence itself could be a kind of expression. By the time the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon in pale gold and faint rose, the anomaly had drifted beyond sight. All that remained was the memory of its movement, the echo of its warmth and cold rhythm, the imprint of its silent path. The soldiers sat quietly, letting the experience settle in their minds. They knew the night had offered them something rare. A lesson in attention, in presence, in the art of observing without demanding. The desert slowly breathed awake. Wind stirred across the dunes. The lake mirrored the softening light. The soldiers rose, each carrying within them the subtle shift that the night had brought, a transformation that lived somewhere between thought and feeling. The silent dance of observation had ended, but its resonance remained. A reminder that depth reveals itself only to those willing to be still, to watch, and to feel without forcing understanding. As morning expanded across the desert, one realization lingered gently among them. Sometimes the universe does not reveal itself with spectacle, but with subtlety. And in that subtlety lies the profound, and somewhere beyond the boundaries of the base, moving in quiet arcs across distant sand and sky, the anomaly continued its path-tracing lines of mystery for those with eyes patient enough to see. Chapter 7: Into the Lake. There is a quiet kind of wonder that comes not from what you see, but from what you imagine must be happening beneath the surface. The desert, its sand, its silence, its impossible horizons held one such secret in the calm waters of Lake Habbaniyah. For the soldiers at Al-Taqadam, the lake had always been part of the backdrop, a mirror for the stars, a soft interruption in the map of operations, a place where time seemed to slow. But on this night, it became something else entirely, a stage for an impossible descent. The anomaly hovered over the lake for a long, breath-held moment, its rounded head pulsed to warm, then cold, then warm again, like a slow and deliberate heartbeat. Its appendages hung still and precise, poised like strokes of ink suspended in the air. And then, without warning and without hesitation, it began its descent. It did not plunge like a bird hunting prey. It did not splash. It did not disturb the glassy surface in even the slightest way. It simply moved downward, silent, effortless, as if air and water were no different, as if gravity itself had relaxed its grip. The soldiers leaned in toward their screens, the room tightening with wordless anticipation. When the object slipped beneath the surface, it vanished completely. No ripples spread. No bubbles rose. Instruments that should have registered temperature shifts or distortion flickered only faintly, offering hints rather than answers. It's gone, someone whispered. Yet in that disappearance, something profound revealed itself. The lake had accepted it. The soldiers tried to imagine the unseen, how the appendages might drift through the depths, how the rounded body adjusted to an environment entirely unlike air. Nothing in their experience could explain the seamless transition from sky to water and back again. No naval drone, no submersible, no experimental craft behaved with such quiet precision. Theories formed, collided, dissolved. A deep-sea creature adapted to both sky and lake. An engineered vehicle far beyond known technology. A biological machine. A sentient presence. But each idea faltered against the same truth. Nothing known moved like this. Outside, the desert night remained perfectly calm, as if acknowledging the object's temporary retreat. Starlight shimmered above and below, caught in the surface of the lake. The air held the faint scent of sand and moisture. Time stretched thin and slow, as if the world were leaning in to listen. 17 minutes passed. 17 minutes in which the object existed in silence beneath the surface, and the soldiers could only observe absence, an absence more expressive than presence. And then it returned. The object rose from the lake exactly as it had entered. Without disturbance, without splash, without breaking the surface tension, it emerged in a smooth, effortless glide, the rounded head leading, the appendages trailing behind in soft arcs. Each motion was fluid, deliberate, impossibly clean. The soldiers watched with awe. Even from a distance, the elegance of the movement was mesmerizing. They compared it silently to creatures of the deep, to mythical sky forms, two beings that existed only in the edges of imagination. But this was no mythology. This was happening, and the perfection of its ascent demanded respect. The object did not pause at the surface. It climbed, steady at first, then angled upward sharper than any human pilot would dare, yet executed with absolute control. Thermal readings flickered again, a familiar sequence of warm-cold pulses, like signals or breath. It went straight up. Controlled, one soldier murmured, still staring at the monitor, like it knew exactly where it was going. Whispers followed, not in fear, but in reverent astonishment. Could such precision be human? Was it a test? A prototype? A classified breakthrough? Or did it belong to some realm beyond engineering entirely? No answer felt sufficient. Possibility had expanded too far, too quickly. Beyond the cabin, the desert exhaled. A faint wind stirred the sand and rippled across the lake. The first disturbance the water had shown since the anomaly entered it. The stars remained steady, unchanged, patient witnesses to the event. The soldiers felt reality stretch around them. The impossible had happened, and in its wake, the world seemed larger. For 17 minutes, they had waited, breath held, instruments ready, minds reaching for understanding. And when the object ascended, they exhaled not with relief, but with quiet gratitude. They had been present at something rare, something delicate, something profound. The anomaly had offered a glimpse of its capabilities, and they had witnessed it. As it drifted back into the sky, the lake returned to stillness. Yet it was no longer just a body of water. It had become a symbol of what lies beneath the surface of understanding, of how much can move unseen, of how quietly the extraordinary can unfold. The soldiers returned to their routines, changed in subtle ways. They had learned that observation is not only measurement, it is patience and stillness and openness. That the most profound experiences often occur in silence, beneath surfaces, or in the quiet space between expectation and reality. As dawn began to color the desert horizon in soft gold and pink, one thought lingered among them. The world is vast, layered, and capable of wonders that do not demand attention. Some mysteries reveal themselves only to the patient observer, and somewhere beyond the lake, drifting high above the desert, the anomaly continued on its path, leaving behind ripples of heat and cold, and the quiet promise of mysteries yet to come. Chapter 8: Patterns in the Sky. The morning after the lake encounter carried a subtle stillness, a hush that lingered in the desert even as the sun climbed higher. Heat stretched slowly over the sand, painting in shades of gold and ochre. But within the quiet of the base, the soldiers' minds remained wrapped in the memory of the anomaly. Every movement of wind, every ripple on the lake, every flutter of distant birds seemed somehow connected to what they had witnessed. It was as though the desert itself had been altered, expanded by the presence of something extraordinary. Though no longer visible, the anomaly remained vivid in their imagination. They replayed its seamless dive into the water, its flawless ascent, the hypnotic pulse of heat that had radiated like a calm breath. And as the hours passed, they began to notice a pattern, not necessarily in the object itself, but in the timing of its appearances, the cadence of its movement, the subtle cues that hinted at something more profound. The rhythm, they realized, had not been random. It was deliberate, a choreography of presence in time and space that whispered of intelligence and intent. Even the morning sky seemed to respond to their reflection. Clouds drifted lazily across pale blue, catching sunlight in delicate gradients, and occasionally a bird traced a long, graceful arc overhead. In these ordinary motions, the soldiers found themselves comparing everything to the anomaly: the fluid precision of its glide through air and water, the coherence of each movement. They began to sketch, map, and record impressions, searching for logic behind what had once felt inexplicable. Was there a pattern to its appearances, a reason for its timing? Or was the anomaly simply traveling on its own terms, unconcerned with human interpretation? Their notes grew more detailed by the day. They tracked altitudes, angles, durations, and the subtle shifts in thermal readings, the warm-cold pulse that felt like a quiet communication. Slowly, an intricate tapestry emerged. The anomaly was not random. It was purposeful, and though they could not decode its intentions, they felt the faint pull of understanding, a sense that the universe might be whispering to those patient enough to listen. The pattern extended beyond movement. The anomaly favored certain altitudes, drifting between 800 and 2,000 feet in a precise rhythm. It lingered near water, lakes, rivers, even shallow pools, as though liquid played a role in its behavior. Though capable of rapid acceleration, it often chose to drift, slowly, deliberately, almost inviting observation. The soldiers began to feel as if they were part of a wordless dialogue, a silent conversation conducted through arcs, pulses, and quiet glides. They wondered whether the anomaly perceived them in some way. Could it see? Did it register attention, or merely respond to the environment? They experimented gently, shifting observation points, focusing different instruments, and noting subtle changes in its behavior. At times, it seemed to respond not aggressively, but with awareness. At others, it appeared indifferent, following its own internal rhythm, aligned with the world around it, yet unconcerned with the humans watching below. Evenings became moments of reflection. As the desert cooled and stars returned, the soldiers watched for hours, observing the dance of heat and shadow, the quiet twists of its appendages, the way it navigated sky and water as if both were made from the same substance. They spoke less and listened more, noticing the faint connections between night, water, and sky. It felt as though the universe was offering them a new kind of literacy, not built on words or numbers, but on presence, patience, and rhythm. The pulses of heat and cold followed a rhythm almost musical in its subtlety. Observers noted sequences, intervals, and slight variations that suggested a complex, internal logic. There was cadence in the shifts, a deliberate alternation of warmth and chill. Some imagined it as a language inaudible to instruments, but perceptible to a patient mind. Each pulse became a note, each arc a phrase, and in their quiet watching, they felt included in something larger, something that pressed gently against the edges of comprehension. Through this, the soldiers learned a truth. Patterns are not always obvious. They require attention, a willingness to notice what others might dismiss as insignificant. A tilt of a few degrees, a subtle hesitation before a glide, the pulse before a shift-o, with threads in a larger fabric. In recognizing these threads, they discovered a deeper connection to the world around them. They were not passive observers, but participants in a universe rich with unseen depth. The anomaly's relationship with the environment fascinated them. It interacted with wind currents, adjusting its path with effortless grace, as though reading invisible streams of air. It responded to temperature shifts on the lake, dipping slightly when the surface warmed, rising when currents cooled. Even its proximity to rock formations seemed intentional, as though navigating through landscapes shaped by forces beyond human senses. Every motion, every pause, every thermal pulse suggested a mastery of the environment that humans could not yet replicate. With each observation, their emotional connection deepened. Curiosity became reverence. They were witnessing a phenomenon that defied explanation, yet evoked no fear. Its present was calm, patient, deliberate. It did not threaten it, invited reflection. And in that invitation, they found the quiet thrill of discovery, the beauty of stillness, the satisfaction of understanding without fully knowing. Days blurred into weeks, and the anomaly became a constant teacher. Its once subtle rhythms grew familiar to those who watched with care. They began to anticipate its motions, recognize variations, and sense when it might appear again. Each observation deepened their understanding, not just of the anomaly, but of themselves, of perception, patience, and the quiet expansiveness of the world. They discovered that attention is a kind of devotion, a way of participating in life's gentle choreography. Stories and sketches accumulated. Notes formed not only a record of events, but of experience, of the shared memories shaped by presence, patience, and curiosity. As they compiled these observations, the soldiers realized they were documenting more than an object. They were documenting a way of seeing, a method for finding the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. And as desert evenings returned, cool and shadowed, they gathered again to watch the anomaly drift across the sky. The patterns persisted, mesmerizing, subtle teaching, without demanding, inviting, without insisting. Under starlight, with the lake mirroring the heavens, the anomaly traced its arcs and pulses, a gentle reminder that the world is vast, layered, and full of quiet truths waiting to be noticed. They came to understand that patterns are more than repetition. They are language, rhythm, connection between observer and observed. And in following these patteransit, shadow, motion, they were participating in a story both ancient and immediate, mysterious and undeniably real. As night deepened and the anomaly drifted into the distance, its patterns lingering in memory, one question remained. If these rhythms existed here, in this desert, where else might they unfold, and what secrets did the world still hold? Chapter 9. The Whisper of Witnesses. In the quiet aftermath of those desert nights, stories began to spread not through newspapers or official channels, but in whispered conversations among those who had seen what others could not. Soldiers spoke cautiously, knowing disbelief was the world's default setting, and yet, in their hushed exchanges, the memory of the anomaly remained alive, vivid, unyielding. It lived in the details, the smooth arcs of its motion, the silent glide, the pulses of heat and cold, the seamless transition from sky to water. It lingered as a subtle reminder that the world often holds truths beyond conventional perception. Some evenings, under the soft lights of the mess hall, soldiers whispered in low, steady tones. One would describe the strange way the appendages floated rigid yet fluid, like delicate fingers tracing invisible currents. Another would recall the color pulses, the flashes of warmth followed by retreating chills, each shift suggesting rhythm, heartbeat, or perhaps a language entirely its own. And as each private account intertwined with the next, a tapestry began to form a collective understanding shaped not by instruments, but by memory, intuition, and careful observation. Outside the base, the desert remained silent, indifferent to the stories men carried. Stars shimmered overhead, each distant sun oblivious to the human narratives unfolding below. The lake remained calm as well, reflecting nothing yet holding, in its depths, the memory of the anomaly's dive and ascent. Nature itself seemed complicit in the quiet, offering stillness, space, and time for reflection. In that stillness, the soldiers felt a subtle communion with the anomaly, a connection that transcended explanation or language. The whispers of witnesses began to carry weight. Soldiers shared small patterns they had noticed. The anomaly, as favored altitudes between 800 and 2,000 feet, the irregular yet clearly deliberate pulses in its heat signature, the graceful precision of its appendages. Each observation was a thread, and as threads accumulated, they suggested coherence, hints of a logic beyond human comprehension. They also noticed environmental correlations. Sometimes the anomaly appeared near the lake, just as temperatures shifted, as though responding to currents or density changes in the air. Other times, its arcs seemed to mirror invisible wind paths, or its pulses aligned with faint vibrations in the sand motions, too subtle for standard instruments. Each new observation reinforced the same quiet truth. Nothing about it was random. Everything was deliberate, patterned, meaningful in ways that lay just beyond familiar boundaries. Yet a sense of humility permeated the experience. For all its precision, the anomaly revealed itself only in fragments. It moved according to rules only partially visible to its observers. It invited attention but demanded patience. It rewarded observation but withheld explanation. In that restraint, it offered a lesson, a gentle teaching about the limits of human perception, the beauty of subtlety, and the power of simply watching without grasping. The soldiers began recording their experiences with care. Notes became sketches. Sketches became diagrams of motion, sequences of pulses, arcs of ascent and descent. Their log evolved into a blend of science, meditation, and storytelling. Through this practice, a new understanding emerged. Observation is not passive. To witness something extraordinary is to participate in a silent dialogue, to acknowledge presence without needing to claim it. Personal reflections surfaced as well. One soldier recalled lying awake after a night of observation, imagining the anomaly gliding over the lake, as though the entire landscape existed for its motion. Another remembered the quiet thrill of watching the heat pulses flicker, recognizing that he was witnessing something both alien and profoundly beautiful, and yet none believed they understood it. The mystery remained intact, persistent, compelling. Occasional reports from nearby bases hinted at similar sightings. Objects moving with the same jellyfish-like grace, appearing near water or drifting silently across night skies. These accounts were scattered, inconsistent, often dismissed by official channels. But together, they formed an invisible constellation of experiences, a map of phenomena, too widespread to ignore, too delicate to fully grasp. The soldiers realized their own encounters were not isolated. They were strands in a global tapestry of quiet, unseen events. Night after night, observation became ritual. The soldiers gathered not out of fear, but in quiet anticipation, attuned to the subtleties of motion, heat, and shadow. They watched the anomaly glide, ascend, vanish, reappear. Each sighting was a reminder that the universe moves along rhythms far beyond expectation. They noticed patterns, deviations, cadences, and in doing so, they discovered a deeper connection to the world, a connection born of patience, reverence, and attention. The whispers carried emotional resonance. Witnessing the anomaly sparked awe, curiosity, and a quiet, sense of wonder. It reminded the soldiers that reality is layered, that perception is partial, and that some truths are not spoken, they are demonstrated through presence and motion. They began to understand that observing was its own form of participation, a way of stepping into a world richer and stranger than most would ever imagine. Even mundane moments triggered recollection. A ripple across the lake, a sudden gust of wind, the shimmer of heat from a vehicle, they all echoed the memory of the anomaly. Each repetition reminded them that the extraordinary often hides within the ordinary, waiting for someone patient enough to notice. The whisper of witnesses became a quiet bond. Though each soldier often observed alone, their shared experiences created a subtle community. Through conversation and reflection, they formed a network of memory and understanding that surpassed any single perspective. Together, they cultivated patience, curiosity, and a willingness to dwell within uncertainty without demanding immediate answers. Outside, the desert kept its silent vigil. The lake mirrored the stars, the moon drifted slowly overhead, and the air carried the faint scent of sand and water. Nature unhurried, held its secrets. The anomaly continued moving through this landscape silent, deliberate, leaving behind patterns of presence, pulses of warmth and cold, and the quiet impression that intelligence and beauty often exist in forms too subtle for most to perceive. Through the whispers of witnesses, a deeper truth emerged. Observation is transformative. It is more than measuring heat or plotting motion. It is participating in the quiet dance of existence, tuning into rhythms, noticing presence, honoring the unknown. And in that act of attention, the soldiers discovered that the anomaly was not merely a phenomenon to be studied. It was a teacher guiding them toward patience, humility, and wonder. As night stretched on, the anomaly continued its silent choreography. Its movements remained consistent yet unpredictable, fluid yet precise. Observers learned to recognize tiny variations, subtle signals, the gentle logic of its presence. Each pulse, glide, and drift was part of a larger story unfolding across dimensions of perception they could only partially access. The whispers carried into dreams. Soldiers found themselves imagining arcs across the sky, pulses of thermal light, and seamless dives into water. These images were not haunting, but mesmerizing. They spoke of a universe layered with intelligence, an eleganza world that did not need words to speak its truths. The whispers became more than stories. They became meditation, practice, a rhythm of awareness. Each soldier learned to honor presence, notice subtlety, and cultivate the quiet patience required to perceive the extraordinary. Through these shared whispers and nights of reflection, the desert had given them not only evidence of something remarkable, but a gentle education in curiosity, wonder, and the art of seeing without needing to fully understand. The anomaly continued its journey. Silent, rhythmic, deliberate. Yet through that patient observation, the soldiers learned to meet it not with fear or disbelief, but with reverence. And in that meeting, they discovered a subtle, transformative power of witnessing, a reminder that sometimes simply paying attention is enough to touch something profound. And as the whispers spread, carried from one observer to the next, the soldiers understood that their story was only beginning, and that the anomaly's quiet presence had opened a door into a world far wider, deeper, and more mysterious than any of them had imagined. Chapter 10. Unseen Currents. The nights that followed the whispers of witnesses were no longer quiet in the usual sense. They carried a new resonance, a faint hum that seemed to belong to the memory of the anomaly itself. Though the object no longer hovered visibly above the lake, its presence lingered like the afterglow of a star briefly crossing the sky. The soldiers found themselves attuned to unseen currents, invisible movements in the air and water, subtle cues suggesting the world was alive in ways they had never noticed before. Observation became more refined. The monitors were no longer just tools for tracking motion. They were windows into a layered reality. Soldiers noted faint thermal echoes where the object had appeared, slight shifts in air pressure, delicate ripples on the lake's surface. It was as if the land remembered holding the imprint of presence for those patient enough to discern it. The soldiers began referring to these sensations simply as the currents. They were not physical currents in any standard sense, nor entirely measurable. Instead, they existed somewhere between perception and memory, between the visible and the felt. A flutter of air, a ripple of water, A transient thermal shadow each became a note in a quiet symphony that demanded attention and patience. The anomaly seemed attuned to these currents as well. Its appearances followed subtle environmental cues, as if it could sense the invisible flows around it. When wind patterns shifted, it adjusted its glide with effortless accuracy. As the lake cooled or warmed, its motions adapted, as though acknowledging the temperature's quiet dialogue. On clouded nights, it altered altitude and speed to maintain harmony with obscured skies. Every movement suggested intelligence intertwined with the environment rather than imposed upon it. This changed the soldiers' understanding of presence. They began to grasp that the anomaly wasn't merely navigating space. It was moving within a network of forces and patterns beyond human perception. It seemed to inhabit a complex web of air, water, and perhaps something subtler still, something no instrument could yet define. The unseen currents reminded them that the world carries layers of meaning rarely visible to the untrained eye. They began to sit beside the lake before dawn with their monitors off, simply listening, feeling the faint shifts in temperature, the soft vibrations in the air, the delicate murmurs of the water. It wasn't spiritual practice, but a discipline and deep attention that blurred the line between observer and environment. These moments grounded them, offering a quiet exhilaration that came from truly noticing the world. Conversations shifted accordingly. They no longer spoke only of data or trajectories. They discussed timing, intuition, and the harmony of motion. "It doesn't just move," one murmured. "It flows, like it knows the paths we can't see." Another whispered back, "It's teaching us how to watch, how to really notice." Evenings became rituals of preparation. Soldiers re-examined thermal footage, tracing patterns in heat and shadow, correlating them with subtle environmental shifts. They learned to anticipate the anomaly not through expectation, but through rhythm and unfolding pulse of presence rather than prediction. It was a new form of attentiveness, one that felt as much like listening as observing. Speculation evolved. Some believed the anomaly responded to atmospheric layers or magnetic fields. Others suggested correlations with water density or unseen vibrations in the sand. They lacked the instruments to prove anything, yet patterns were undeniable. The desert nights became classrooms, the world itself, the instructor, and the soldiers its attentive pupils. Emotionally, the transformation was profound. The soldiers learned that mystery is not always dramatic. It often resides in subtle pulses, quiet rhythms, and presence without spectacle. It was an education in nuance, an invitation to perceive the extraordinary woven into the ordinary. The anomaly remained the perfect embodiment of this subtleness. Its movements were fluid, its pulses measured, its transitions between air and water seamless. It revealed itself without surrendering its mystery, allowing the privilege of observation while refusing intrusion. It taught by example that some truths are meant to be experienced, not solved. Over time, observation became an act of reverence. Soldiers trusted their intuition, recognized patterns without requiring verification, and allowed insights to form naturally. The desert, the lake, and the sky became part of a larger dialogue, each element connected, each movement part of a deeper rhythm. Even during ordinary tasks, the soldiers felt changed. They noticed wind shifts across the tents, the dance of shadows on dunes, the soft variations in dawn light. Each subtle observation felt like a continuation of the anomaly's lessons. The world, they realized, was full of unseen currents. Long before the anomaly arrived, its presence simply sharpened their awareness. Through this quiet education, a truth emerged. Intelligence is not always loud. Awareness can be gentle, deliberate, integrated with the environment. The anomaly was not merely a visitor. It was a teacher and a mirror reflecting their own capacity for attention. The desert, the lake, and the anomaly formed a subtle symphony. Each night the soldiers attuned themselves to the rhythm of unseen currents, discovering a deeper sense of connection to the world around them. Their whispered reflections, their shared intuitions, and the quiet patience they cultivated became part of a broader narrative, one shaped not by certainty, but by presence. And as the nights stretched on, the soldiers realized they stood at the threshold of something larger. The unseen currents did more than guide the anomaly. They hinted at truths waiting just beyond perception, forces shaping the world quietly, persistently, invisibly. The anomaly had not yet revealed its next mystery, but the currents had begun to change, and the soldiers felt it even before they saw it. Chapter 11. Echoes Across Time. The desert holds memories long after the wind has moved on. The nights at Al-Taqadum were no longer just nights. They had become vessels for something larger, echoes of motion, presence, and the quiet rhythm of phenomena that defied expectation. The soldiers had grown attuned to the anomaly's patterns, to the unseen currents that carried it, and to the subtle pulse of its existence. And as with all things that touch something profound, each moment of perception was never truly isolated. It resonated, stretching backward and forward in time, inviting reflection on what had been and what might still come. Some soldiers began thinking beyond the desert, beyond the lake and the base. They wondered whether similar anomalies had appeared elsewhere in other skies, in other years, recorded and forgotten, noticed and dismissed. Their curiosity was gentle, reflective. It sought not proof, but connection. Were they witnessing something singular, or were they participating in a pattern that had unfolded across the world in fragments and whispers? Memory and research began to intertwine. One soldier recalled a colleague describing an object seen over the mountains of Afghanistan months earlier. Another remembered hazy, half-classified footage from Peru, a small, dome-like entity with appendages gliding through air and slipping through matter as if boundaries were merely suggestions. The parallels were subtle yet undeniable, the form, the grace, the effortless transitions between environments, even filtered through distance and time. The echoes aligned, hinting at a shared logic, a quiet intent that transcended geography. It was as though the anomaly, or its kin, carried a signature, an invisible imprint on the fabric of observation, across continents, across years, across bodies of water and stretches of desert. Its movements spoke in the same language: heat pulses, arcs of ascent, fluid dives, seamless crossings between mediums. Soldiers, now trained by experience to read subtle patterns, could recognize the echo even without direct sight. Each memory became a reference point, a map for perception, a guide for understanding something that existed both in the present and far beyond it. These echoes carried more than pattern. They carried emotion. Observers in different places described the same blend of awe, tension, curiosity, and calm. It felt as though the universe was speaking in a steady voice, quiet, consistent, unmistakably deliberate. Every sighting seemed connected to the next, forming a narrative, not written in words, but in presence, rhythm, and motion. In recognizing these echoes, the soldiers realized they were participating in a global conversation stretched across space and time. It became clear that the anomaly was not bound to one place. Reports from Iraq, Afghanistan, Peru, and later from deserts, mountains, and coastlines around the world revealed a phenomenon with mobility, intelligence, and a preference for specific environmental conditions. And yet, its behavior remained consistent. The grace, the pulses, the interplay with air and water, the sensitivity to unseen currents. No matter the locale, these qualities echoed faithfully, giving the phenomenon a recognizable identity. The soldiers began to understand that they were not simply observing an object, they were witnessing a phenomenon that invited reflection on existence itself. The echoes across time felt like a message. The universe contains layers and intelligence threaded quietly through its structure. One could dismiss such things, but those who watched with patience discovered that perception is not passive. It is active, participatory, transformative. Their reflections took shape in quiet conversations during late-night watches, over morning coffee, beside the lake at dusk. Each soldier contributed fragments of memory and insight, weaving them together into a shared understanding. They spoke of the anomaly's intentional rhythm, how its movements felt almost conversational, a silent dialogue with both observer and landscape. They compared notes across days, weeks, months, mapping echoes of motion, as if tracing the signature of something profoundly intelligent, yet deeply elusive. Even instruments began to affirm the pattern. When thermal footage from different regions was compared, consistent arcs and pulses emerged, similar velocities, similar transitions, similar behavior in relation to wind, water, and shifting temperatures. Each sighting was unique, yet all adhered to an underlying structure like variations on a theme. Soldiers, trained to analyze and quantify, approached this with both rigor and humility, aware that they were glimpsing only a fraction of a logic far larger than their tools could measure. The anomaly's influence seeped into the soldiers' inner worlds. In dreams, they saw echoes of its motion. In waking moments, they noticed parallels in the mundane, the arc of a bird's flight, sunlight warming sand, ripples spreading across the lake. Observation became a form of meditation, a way of engaging with the world that felt richer, more layered. They understood that to witness something extraordinary is to be changed by it. The anomaly had become a teacher of attention, patience, and the art of subtle knowing. Questions naturally arose. What was the origin of these manifestations? Were they natural? Engineered? Something in between? Why did they appear in patterns? Why did they favor certain altitudes, bodies of water, and climatological thresholds? But the soldiers did not demand answers. Their curiosity had become contemplative. The beauty of these echoes was that they offered insight without certainty, presence without explanation, wonder without boundaries. In this reflection, the anomaly revealed a deeper lesson about time. Though each appearance was brief, its impression endured, forming a thread that wove one sighting into another. Soldiers began to understand time, not as a linear sequence, but as a medium, a way of connecting events across distances and landscapes. A glide across the lake in Iraq resonated with a dive into a mountain lake in Afghanistan. A pulse over Peru found its counterpart in a rise over the American desert. Time became fluid, connecting rather than separating. The desert nights themselves seemed to honor these echoes. Stars shimmered with a quiet recognition. The lake reflected not just the sky, but the memory of motion. The air carried subtle vibrations, reminders of the rhythms that had unfolded there. Soldiers moved through this space with respect and patience, aware that witnessing echoes was participation in a much larger story. And as observation deepened, so did understanding. To notice echoes across time was to practice mindfulness, a refined attention to connection and presence. The soldiers began to see the world differently, in the interplay of currents, in patterns of shadow and wind, in the rhythms of nature they had once overlooked. The anomaly had become more than a phenomenon. It had become a guide, teaching them to perceive the deeper textures of reality. In the quiet moments, they recognized the most important echo of all. The world is alive with patterns, intelligence, and rhythm, whether noticed or not. For those who pay attention, the universe whispers. It leaves traces, hints of presence, invitations to awaken to its hidden layers. They realized that these anomalies were not merely events, they were openings, gentle calls to look deeper. Through their observations, reflections, and shared understanding, the soldiers became part of a continuum of witness across time, across geography, across generations of quiet observers. They might never fully explain the phenomenon, but they could learn from it, honor it, and carry its lessons forward. And so, night after night, observation became meditation. Curiosity became connection. Presence became understanding. The echoes across time formed a living thread, an ever-growing tapestry of motion, insight, and wonder. The soldiers knew that every sighting, every pulse, every glide was part of a story that was only just beginning to reveal itself. And as those echoes stretched further across continents and years, a new chapter of observation emerged, bringing not only glimpses of motion, but questions that would reach into the deepest corners of human curiosity. Chapter 12. Signals in the Silence. The desert night had a voice all its own, though it spoke not in words but in subtle current shifts in temperature, the soft drift of wind, the delicate rustle of sand. For the soldiers at Al-Taqadam, that voice had grown more distinct over months of attentive vigil. Each night, as darkness settled over the base and the lake reflected the scattered stars, they felt the presence of the anomaly not as a threat, but as a quiet signal, an unspoken reminder that something extraordinary moved just beyond the edge of ordinary perception. Silence became a medium, with instruments powered down and monitors dimmed. The soldiers learned to tune themselves to the faintest cues. The lift of a breeze, the shimmer of moonlight on water, the subtle temperature gradients drifting across open sand. All of it formed a network of signals they were slowly learning to read. The anomaly didn't announce itself loudly. It communicated in whispers through motion, rhythm, and presence. Those willing to pay attention could perceive it not just with their eyes, but with a heightened awareness of the environment itself. At times, the signals were literal. Thermal monitors recorded faint heat pulses irregular, yet rhythmic, moving in patterns far too deliberate to be random. Soldiers began recognizing sequences, a kind of silent code etched in gradients of warm and cold. One evening, a sequence danced over the lake. A quick pulse, a long pause, then a cluster of rapid flickers. They watched in stillness, noting each detail. Was it communication? Behavior? A natural rhythm? No answer came. Yet the act of noticing held its own significance. Patience became their practice. Many nights passed without a single sighting, yet even the quiet carried meaning. They learned that absence, too, was part of the signal, that waiting without expectation was a form of dialogue. There was no urgency, no mandate to understand. The anomaly taught them to inhabit silence, to perceive subtleties they had never noticed before, and to discover meaning in the simple act of observing. Over time, they began mapping signals against environmental shifts. Slight changes in wind, humidity, or air pressure, often aligned with subtle variations in the anomaly's behavior. Sometimes it appeared when the lake's surface shimmered in a specific pattern. Sometimes when the breeze carried a particular tension. They documented these correlations with care, blending scientific discipline with intuitive sensitivity. They were charting not just movement, but relationships, how environment, presence, and observation intertwined in ways that defied easy measurement. The anomaly's signals were never static. One night, pulses that had followed predictable rhythms suddenly shifted, gliding across the lake with a new grace, as if adapting to an unseen current. Soldiers watched in reverence, sensing intention behind the motion. The anomaly seemed to interact with both the visible world and something beyond it, responsive, aware, and yet fundamentally unknowable. In quieter hours, soldiers reflected on the emotional resonance of these signals. The anomaly evoked awe without fear, curiosity without urgency, focus without strain. Observing its subtle cues became a kind of meditana practice that aligned their perception with the natural rhythms around them. They realized that understanding wasn't always about explanation. Sometimes it was about attunement, learning to feel, to notice, and to remain present. Collaboration deepened this awareness. No single observer could perceive everything, but collectively, patterns emerged. Soldiers compared notes during watch shifts and whispered reflections by the lake. Carefully, respectfully, they pieced together recurring themes, subtle deviations, and shared impressions. Their conversations were not about solving a mystery, but about perceiving it, together building a communal intuition for the anomaly's silent language. Beyond Iraq, these signals began to echo outward. Reports from other parts of the world, mountain ranges, coastlines, remote lakes took on new meaning. Small pulses in distant skies, arcs above isolated waters, movements too precise to dismiss, all suggested a broader tapestry of presence. Soldiers imagined a global network, subtle, deliberate, and woven through environments as if following a larger logic. The realization was humbling. The anomaly was part of something far wider than their desert nights. Night after night, they refined their perception. They practiced distinguishing signal from noise, finding joy in the discipline of attention. Even ordinary elements, shifting clouds, bright stars, rippling water, became part of an expanded conversation with the world. Every signal from the anomaly became a quiet lesson, guiding their understanding of presence, movement, and timing. Recording these signals became ritual. Pulses, arcs, temperature shifts all were logged carefully, not for immediate answers, but as part of a living memory, a growing archive of experience. Sketches captured the motion. Notes traced sequence and rhythm. Reflections documented emotion and intuition. Their records formed a bridge between fleeting moments and lasting insight. Sometimes the anomaly appeared in brief flashes, a glint over the lake or flicker on the horizon. Even these tiny moments mattered. Soldiers learned to recognize the subtle precursors to its presence. Shifts in heat, pressure, or the slightest tremor in the wind. Anticipation became a form of attunement, an openness to noticing the extraordinary within the ordinary. The signals reminded them of him. Some pulses faded too quickly to interpret. Some arcs vanished like reflections disturbed by ripples. Yet even these ephemeral moments left a lasting impression. The lesson was simple. Clarity isn't guaranteed. Understanding isn't instant. And sometimes the act of noticing is enough. As weeks turned to months, the soldiers realized that the anomaly's signals mirrored the nature of perception itself. The world held patterns and rhythms, subtle intelligences hiding in plain sight. The anomaly didn't demand meaning. It offered presence. It didn't insist on understanding. It invited reflection. Through this quiet invitation, soldiers began seeing the world and themselves with new clarity. The desert, the lake, and the night sky became a theater of subtle communication. Every pulse, glide, and flicker offered insight into motion and timing. Soldiers found calm in observation, connection in shared attention, and purpose in the discipline of noticing. The anomaly remained mysterious, yet its signals transformed their understanding of reality, reshaping curiosity into awareness, and awareness into respect. And so the signals in the silence continued to guide them. Night after night, observation became meditation. Attention became dialogue. Silence became a language. The soldiers learned to listen without words, to see without expectation, and to witness without intrusion. In doing so, they discovered that the universe often speaks not in spectacle, but in subtle pulses, gentle rhythms, and quiet invitations to pay attention. As the signals stretched into dawn and the days beyond, the soldiers sensed that each pulse carried more than information. It carried connection, or reminder that the extraordinary is most often found in the subtle, patient language of the world around them. Chapter 13. Shadows Across Continents. The world felt quieter in the moments before dawn, as if holding its breath for secrets not yet revealed. Far from the deserts of Iraq, thousands of miles away, the same mysterious presence known to some as the Jellyfish UAP continued its silent passage. Observers across continents began noticing a strange synchrony in sightings, a delicate choreography that defied coincidence. From the high peaks of the Hindu Kush to the streets south of Lima, from lakes in Georgia to the coastal clouds of California, the anomaly traced a path that wove distant lands into a single web of wonder. In Peru, a small town near Lima stirred with whispers after an event that would echo across the world. A quiet evening turned extraordinary when a dome-headed entity appeared at a gas station, its appendages swaying gently like a marionette, guided by invisible threads. Witnesses froze unsure whether they were seeing a hallucination, a trick of light, or something profoundly outside their experience. A driver, inching his vehicle forward, collided with the entity, or so it seemed. Yet the being emerged entirely unharmed, moving with an elegance that defied physical expectation. The encounter left the town stunned. How could something so tangible, yet seemingly untouchable, exist within the same rules of reality everyone else obeyed? Thousands of miles northeast, analysts in Afghanistan were confronted with their own mystery. An MQ-9 Reaper drone, soaring above the Hindu Kush, captured footage of a shimmering orb with tentacle-like appendages gliding through early morning mist. It matched no known aerial profile. Its movements precise, fluid, almost playful, suggested an intelligence or awareness responding to the drone's distant gaze. The metallic sheen seemed to vanish and reappear, as though shifting between states. Analysts pored over every frame, recalibrating sensors, cross-referencing databases, yet found only deeper uncertainty. How could it hover so effortlessly, adapt so seamlessly, disappear without trace? What connected these sightings was more than shape or motion. It was resonance. Across continents, observers noted the same arcs, the same rhythmic pulses of heat, the same graceful sway of appendages. There was a subtle intelligence present, not forceful or intrusive, but relational, aware, and deeply attuned. Those who encountered it described the same quiet dialogue. Each glide and shimmer felt like a message, a note in an invisible symphony connecting sky, earth, and human perception. In the quiet towns of Georgia, another sighting unfolded, this time before children and adults together. A dementor jellyfish. One local journalist wrote, drifted over a freshwater lake, moving against the wind with effortless poise. Its surface shifted between iridescent patterns and opaque silhouettes, as they were responding to the sunlight. Some swore it possessed a kind of sentience, an ability to react to the attention and emotion of the watchers below. Mothers held children close-knot, out of fear, but in awe, sensing they were witnessing a fragment of a larger reality, one that quietly defied expectation. The common thread across continents was subtle, yet unmistakable. The anomaly was adaptive, relational, and remarkably consistent. In every location, it seemed to sense the presence of witnesses, responding with gentle, intentional shifts. No camera captured its full nature. No instrument defined its motion. It moved as though the world itself were part of its medium, as if each observer contributed to a broader pattern. The jellyfish UAP appeared less like a single object, and more like a participant in a silent global dialogue. Analysts, scientists, and civilians began asking questions that bent the edges of conventional understanding. Was it biological, evolved for both air and water in ways humans had yet to imagine? Was it technological, crafted by unknown hands? Or was it something that existed at the intersection of physics and perception? Each hypothesis carried weight. None encompassed the phenomenon's quiet profundity. The anomaly challenged assumptions, encouraging witnesses to expand their sense of what was possible rather than chase simple explanations. A shared emotional thread also emerged. Witnesses spoke of quiet awe, of connection, of a reflective stillness that lingered long after the anomaly faded. They described the air as charged with attention, shadows seeming to lengthen in synchrony with the entity's glide, and time feeling elastic, stretching, bending subtly beneath the weight of observation. The jellyfish UAP was not merely a presence. It was a catalyst, awakening a deeper layer of perception and hinting at a reality more interconnected than most dared to imagine. Back in Iraq, the soldiers who had first observed the anomaly watched news of these global sightings with reflective recognition. The patterns they had tracked for months now resonated across continents. Each new report mirrored aspects of their own experiences: the gliding motion, the thermal pulses, the graceful appendages, yet carried the imprint of its local environment. It became increasingly clear that these were not isolated events, but nodes in a vast network of interaction. The anomaly was alive in its patterning, alive in its relational intelligence, and alive in the subtle ways it threaded itself through the world. Patterns emerged as days turned into nights. Observers documented arcs and pulses, creating maps that traced the anomaly's travels across land and sea. Scientists compared footage from distant regions, noting mirrored movements and shared thermal rhythms. Some sequences echoed earlier events, as though the phenomenon carried a kind of memory. Others adapted, shifting gracefully with each new environment. Across oceans and mountains, a story was unfolding, one of presence, resonance, and intelligence that transcended geography. In quiet moments of reflection, observers realized the phenomenon was teaching them something profound about perception. To witness it fully required slowing down, breathing, and aligning observation with presence rather than expectation. Instruments could record motion, but not relationship. They could measure heat, but not the subtle interplay of awareness that seemed to emerge when attention was gentle and patient. Witnessing became a meditation, revealing as much about the observer as the observed. A global narrative took shape, one that emphasized connection. Individual sightings were intriguing, but incomplete. Only when viewed together did a coherent pattern begin to emerge. Arcs, pulses, glides forming a silent symphony of presence that hinted at intelligence and intention. The jellyfish UAP, illustrated something deeper than its own nature, revealed the participatory quality of reality itself. Yet the mystery endured. No explanation fully fit. If it was technology, why the organic fluidity? If biological, where were the signs of respiration or biology? And if something else entirely, what principles governed its existence, and why did it appear only to those who watched with patience? By sunrise in each distant location, witnesses shared the same quiet reverence. They had seen something extraordinary, perhaps, not fully explainable, but deeply felt. From Iraq to Peru, Afghanistan to Georgia, the jellyfish UAP had become more than an anomaly. It was a mirror, a teacher, a reminder that reality is thick with hidden layers and subtle intelligence. Observation was no longer passive, it was participant. And as night returned to each corner of the world, observers felt an invisible thread linking skies, lakes, and hearts. The anomaly moved on, leaving arcs, pulses, and glimmers that whispered of intention and wonder. It reminded humanity that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but experienced, reflected upon, and woven into memory. Across continents, the story continued not only in headlines and footage, but in quiet reflection and shared curiosity. The Jellyfish UAP had become a global mirror, connecting human awareness to a phenomena that defied limits yet invited attention. Each observer became part of a networker's silent web, joining perception to presence. Its significance lay not merely in form or origin, but in its ability to awaken wonder, patience, and relational understanding. From shadows across continents to thermal pulses in distant deserts, it revealed that curiosity and presence are instruments of insight. And as the world watched and wondered, the anomaly continued its journey, silent, graceful, and profoundly alive, connecting hearts, minds, and skies in ways humanity is only beginning to understand. Chapter 14. The Language of Light. Night in the desert had become a companion, a teacher, a mirror. By now, the soldiers at Al-Taqaddum understood that observing the anomaly wasn't about catching it in motion, but about sensing the interplay between presence, environment, and perception. Patterns had already emerged in pulses, arcs, and thermal rhythms. Then a new layer revealed itself, subtle at first, but unmistakable. A language of light. The earliest hints appeared in the thermal feeds. Faint variations in brightness rippled across the anomaly's surface, delicate flickers, almost like breaths of illumination. Some pulses were sharp and quick, others slow and fluid, glowing with a rhythm that felt intentional. At first the soldiers dismissed these as sensor noise or environmental interference, but as nights passed and attention sharpened, the consistency became undeniable. These were patterns, faint, but deliberate. Soon they realized the pulses responded to context. The shimmer of starlight, reflections on the still lake, shifts in temperature or wind currents, each seemed to draw a subtle adjustment in the anomaly's glow. It was as if it were acknowledging its surroundings, interacting with the environment and the observers alike. Soldiers began calling it a conversation in light, a dialogue without words, carried through rhythm and attention. They timed the sequences meticulously. A bright pulse, followed by a long, dim one. A pause, a soft flicker that mirrored a breeze passing over the water. Watching felt like listening to an unspoken song, a quiet code that revealed itself only through patience. Observation became a meditation, a stillness that matched the anomaly's own gentle cadence. On some evenings, the anomaly drifted across the lake as though following choreography, its light pulses aligned with sweeping arcs of movement, tracing paths that mirrored the contours of the dunes and the ripples on the water. When soldiers layered visual and thermal recordings, the combined sequences resembled symbols, forms that hinted at structure, even intention. They resisted the urge to interpret too soon. Instead, they focused on noticing, allowing the patterns to imprint themselves naturally. Emotion intertwined with analysis. The soldiers spoke of calm anticipation, a quiet exhilaration, even reverence. The pulses felt intimate, not intrusive, not threatening, but communicative. Each glow and dim felt like a moment of connection, a bridge between human perception and the presence hovering above the lake. Eventually, they began experimenting with literal reflection. Mirrors placed around their observation posts caught the anomaly as fine pulses, creating layered reflections of shimmer and glow. Surprisingly, the anomaly seemed to respond, its rhythms shifting subtly in alignment with the reflected patterns. The soldiers realized the language of light wasn't fixed. It was interactive, responsive to attention and environment, like a living dialogue. Speculation grew. Were the pulses communicative, adaptive? Were they deliberate expressions, environmental feedback, or something entirely outside familiar frameworks? Even without answers, the soldiers sensed intelligence, quiet, relational, and attuned to presence. The language of light wasn't something to decode with instruments alone. It required stillness, intuition, and receptivity. On windless nights, pulses scattered across the lake like ripples of energy, reflecting starlight in synchronized patterns. When clouds drifted overhead, the anomaly adjusted its brightness to maintain contrast, as if ensuring it remained perceivable. Even faint desert winds elicited changes in rhythm. Light, motion, and environment blended seamlessly, creating a communication that existed only in relationship. They began mapping their observation sketches layered with notations of pulses, arcs, environmental shifts. These maps charted not just movement, but rhythm. They revealed that the anomaly's language wasn't linear. It unfolded simultaneously in thermal, visual, and spatial dimensions. Understanding required patience, openness, and a willingness to perceive rather than assume. The more they listened, the more they realized their own perception was changing. Approaching observation with curiosity rather than expectation clarified the patterns. The anomaly wasn't behaving differently. They were simply seeing more. The language of light wasn't encoded in fixed messages. It emerged through relationship, through the way attention shaped perception. It taught them that understanding is partly an internal readiness. Even in its absence, its influence lingered. Soldiers began noticing subtle rhythms in the natural world, flickers of starlight behind drifting clouds, the way moonlight played across dunes, the reflections at dawn on the lake's surface. The anomaly had attuned them to subtlety. It taught them that communication wasn't limited to presence. It also blossomed in the awareness cultivated by waiting, remembering, and noticing. Some nights brought extraordinary synchrony. Pulses aligned with reeds, swaying at the shoreline, with insects moving in the cool air, even with the quiet cadence of footsteps on sand. These moments felt ritualistic, as though the anomaly and the desert were performing a shared pattern in which humans were allowed to witness through stillness. They revealed that observation is fundamentally participatory, but the sequences were never predictable. Variations in rhythm kept the soldiers attentive, open, and humble. The language of light was dynamic, alive, shifting, responding. It nurtured qualities rarely demanded in military life: patience, presence, receptivity. Gradually, the soldiers understood the larger lesson. They weren't just observing a phenomenon, they were learning how to perceive. The anomaly was teaching them to notice patterns, to understand intelligence in subtle forms, to listen with more than their instruments. It became a guide, instructing through light, stillness, and rhythm. Night after night, the language unfolded. Each pulse became a question, each shimmer a lesson, each arc a reminder that comprehension isn't only about data, it's about awareness. And as the sequences deepened, the soldiers began to sense that these lights were not isolated expressions. They were part of something larger, threads pointing toward deeper truths woven into the fabric of reality itself. Chapter 15. The Depths Between Worlds. The desert night seemed endless, yet within its darkness, the world was alive. Whispers of wind through the dunes, ripples on the lake, and the quiet pulse of something extraordinary. Ataltakadum. The soldiers had become fluent in patterns, arcs, pulses, shifts in thermal glow, the subtle rhythms of presence. But as they watched the anomaly glide across Lake Habbaniyah, they began to sense something more. The phenomenon wasn't just moving through the world, it was moving between worlds, slipping through the thin membranes where air met water, where surface met depth, where perception itself acted as a bridge. Its dives into the lake were brief, surreal, almost impossibly delicate. It entered the water without splash or disturbance, as if acknowledging a boundary no human craft could cross without rupture. Its descent and ascent traced perfect. Watching it, the soldiers began to realize the world was not composed of separate layers, but of gradients, a continuum through which the anomaly moved with effortless unity. Air and water were simply different expressions of the same space, and the anomaly navigated both as if sensing the unseen currents that stitched them together. At the boundary between air and water, something remarkable occurred. Thermal signatures bent, flickered, and reformed, dancing to the anomaly's internal rhythm. Each dive carried the pulse patterns the soldiers recognized from its aerial behavior. Each ascent returned that rhythm in reverse. The pulses were not random, they resonated across mediums, stitching surface and depth into a single dialogue. The anomaly was not merely moving, it was connecting realms, weaving a continuous thread of presence, through places humans understood as discrete. Emotion accompanied observation. The soldiers felt a deep calm watching the anomaly slip beneath the surface, awe soft and grounding, as if they were witnessing a natural law expressed in a form they had never imagined. Its fluidity suggested intelligence without force, mastery without dominance. The phenomenon challenged expectations not through power, but through ease, showing that boundaries could be crossed gently, respectfully, gracefully. Light played differently underwater. Subtle flickers traveled beneath the surface, refracting through currents and ripples, mirroring sequences the soldiers had documented in the air. The underwater pulses weren't diminished. They were transformed, adapted to a new environment, while preserving the core rhythm. It was choreography, quiet and deliberate, as if each dive was a verse in a wordless poem unfolding across two worlds. Speculation deepened. If the anomaly could transition between mediums so seamlessly, what did that suggest about its nature? Its origin. Its design. No known craft could move like this, no wake, no turbulence, no disruption. Yet its presence felt neither mechanical nor aggressive. It evoked curiosity, reverence, and an unexpected sense of being gently instructed. Its movement showed what was possible not through engineering alone, but through attunement to environment. The soldiers learned quickly that this phenomenon demanded patience. Its pacing was deliberate, its transitions subtle. If they rushed their observations, the deeper patterns slipped past unnoticed. But when they matched its rhythm, quieting their minds, softening their attentionally, layers revealed themselves. They saw minute variations in timing, shifts in thermal resonance, faint echoes of pulses between air and water. Presencia senti. Existence. It was participation. The anomaly blurred boundaries, not just physically, but conceptually. Watching it, soldiers began noticing other continuities. How a shimmer on the lake sometimes mirrored a flicker of light in the sky. How a shift in wind aligned with a thermal ripple over the dunes. How distant reflections carried patterns previously ignored. The world, they realized, was interconnected in ways they had never thought to observe. Air and water, shadow and reflection, these domains were not separate, but interwoven through rhythm, pulse, and presence. Emotion refined perception. With time, the soldiers no longer watched the anomaly with analytical detachment. They watched with attention, quiet, receptive, grounded. The lake became a mirror, the dunes a backdrop of subtle cues, the night sky a canvas for reflection. The anomaly seemed less like an object and more like an expression of relationship, between movement and environment, between light and depth, between observer and observed. Casual conversations shifted accordingly. The soldiers began describing the anomaly as a bridge not just between air and water, but between perception and awareness. It caused them to reflect not only on the physical world, but on consciousness itself. How attention shapes what is perceived, and how perception shapes the meaning derived from it. Each dive, each ascent, felt like a quiet lesson in the nature of awareness, patience, and the subtle intelligence woven into the fabric of existence. The practical work continued, of course. They logged arcs, mapped pulses, cataloged thermal traces, noted environmental factors. But the data only told part of the story. The deeper understanding arose, not from measurement, but from attunement, from the way perception expanded as they opened themselves to subtlety. Observation became a multidimensional practice, part science, part intuition, part contemplation. Even ordinary moments took on new significance. A ripple of water, the shift of moonlight across the lake, the rise of a warm breeze, each became part of the tapestry of perception through which they witnessed the anomaly. They had learned to see with presence, not just sight. The desert was no longer a backdrop. It was a collaborator. Night after night, the anomaly offered variations. A slightly longer dive, a steeper arc, a pulse that flickered with new rhythm. The changes were delicate but meaningful. They revealed adaptability, evolution, a quiet intelligence that responded to environment and, perhaps, to attention. The soldiers learned to embrace uncertainty, recognizing that the phenomenon was neither chaotic nor predictable. It was alive in its rhythm. Weeks passed, then months. the lessons deepened. The anomaly became more than a mystery. It became a teacher of perception. Through its transmedium flights and dives, it showed them how to inhabit the present fully, how to notice patterns at the edge of awareness, how to perceive continuity where others saw boundaries. Observation transformed from surveillance into mindfulness, from data collection into a meditative engagement with motion, rhythm, and presence. In these nights, the soldiers understood the anomaly as a guide of subtle intelligence. Its dives and glides illustrated principles far beyond aerodynamics, principles of alignment, patience, and harmony with environment. Its pulses taught attentiveness. Its transmedium grace revealed continuity. Its presence dissolved rigid separations and invited a broader way of sensing the world. The depths between worlds, air and water, surface and reflection, perception and awareness became a space of learning. Soldiers watched, recorded, reflected. They discovered that extraordinary phenomena often teach not through spectacle, but through subtlety, not through answers, but through rhythm, not through explanation, but through presence. And as the anomaly continued its quiet choreography between worlds, the soldiers began to see that these patterns were not isolated events. They were threads, woven into a larger tapestry of motion, intelligence, and quiet connection that extended far beyond the desert night. Chapter 16. The Watchers and the Watched. By now, the soldiers at Al-Taqadam had become participants in a delicate rhythm of observation and reflection. The anomaly's nightly dances across desert and lake had revealed patterns of motion, subtle pulses of light, and fluid arcs that bound air and water into a single continuum. But with every hour spent watching, another awareness slowly surfaced. The presence of themselves as observers. The anomaly was not only something to be seen, it was a mirror, reflecting the watchers back to themselves in ways quiet, profound, and transformative. At first, this mirror was subtle. Soldiers found their attention sharpening, their patience deepening, their conversations softening into quiet exchanges. Observation shifted from duty to contemplation. They realized that watching the anomaly was not only about understanding its behavior, it was about understanding their own attention, presence, and sensitivity. It seemed, in its own way, aware not in a human sense, but like a river adjusting to the terrain it moves through or wind-shaping dunes without effort. Its movements were deliberate and responsive, engaging the observers in a silent dialogue. Every pulse and shimmer felt like an invitation. Notice carefully, reflect quietly, become aware of your own presence in relation to the world. Some soldiers experimented with this awareness. A few sat quietly by the lake with eyes closed, feeling the anomaly's rhythm through intuition rather than instruments. Others sketched arcs and pulses in silence. Whatever form it took, the practice carried the same thread. Observation had become a meditative act, a way of aligning human perception with something subtle and extraordinary. Emotionally, the anomaly stirred wonder, curiosity, and humility. Soldiers felt the difference between expectation and true observation. The urge to explain gave way to simply noticing. In the presence of such quiet intelligence, they felt small and yet connected as, though participating in a dialogue that transcended understanding, the anomaly became a teacher of how humans react, adapt, and perceive. Its fluid responsiveness reinforced this. It navigated air and water with effortless continuity, adjusting to changes in light, thermal shifts, and wind. Soldiers noticed that their own attention affected what they perceived. Heightened awareness revealed details that distraction erased. The anomaly became a lesson in mindfulness, guiding them to engage with presence and clarity. Discussions shifted from technical speculation to introspection. "It's like it knows we're watching," one murmured. "Maybe not consciously," another replied, "but it responds, and in watching it, we notice ourselves." These reflections knitted the observers together. Shared awareness fostered empathy, patience, and a deeper attentiveness that carried into daily routines and conversations. Observation became a balance, to witness without forcing interpretation, to perceive without expecting meaning. Each pulse and shimmer became an opportunity to refine perception and explore the boundaries of awareness. The anomaly's presence expanded beyond its physical behavior, becoming a catalyst for inner understanding. Slowly, Subtle psychological shifts appeared. Soldiers felt more connected to the anomaly, to the environment. Moments once considered mundane, the ripple of water, the flicker of starlight, became rich with significance. Awareness no longer depended on the anomaly's presence. It permeated everything. Time itself began to stretch. Hours slipped by unnoticed. During the quiet vigil, yet every detail of the anomaly's motion was etched into memory with vivid clarity. The phenomena had introduced a rhythm not only into the environment, but into consciousness. Even the anomaly's absences taught something. When it drifted beyond the horizon, the soldiers' sharpened awareness persisted. They continued noticing the whisper of wind, the play of reflections, the shifting tones of night. Observation became unbound from the object. It became a state of being. Its transitions between air and water took on new meaning. Each dive and ascent revealed pulses of light and thermal signatures that aligned with environmental rhythms. Observers began to perceive these transitions as a kind of communication, subtle language linking environment, phenomenon, and observer. Emotionally, the soldiers experienced moments of awe and quiet joy, not from understanding, but from participation. They felt woven into a shared choreography of perception. In this interconnectedness, they discovered humility, awareness, and the depth of their own capacity to notice. The anomaly sequences were both predictable and surprising, dynamic enough to require flexibility, patterned enough to reward focused attention. Soldiers embraced the ambiguity, learning that uncertainty was not an obstacle but an opportunity to remain open and curious. In time, they internalized a profound truth. Observation is inseparable from the observer. Watching the anomaly became a practice in attunement and presence. Each pulse and shimmer carried lessons beyond the immediate moment. To observe was to participate, align, and reflect. The anomaly, quiet and fluid, transformed their understanding of the world. Its movements taught rhythm, pattern, patience, and the beauty of subtle intelligence. It became both mirror and guide, revealing that the extraordinary is often found not in spectacle, but in the act of noticing. And so, the watchers and the watched continued their silent exchange. Each night offered new variations, new lessons, and deeper insight. The soldiers observed and reflected, discovering that presence itself is a bridge between perception and understanding, curiosity and insight, observer and observed. And as this dialogue deepened, they would soon encounter signs that these rhythms extended far beyond the desert threads that wove into a larger tapestry of intelligence, motion, and subtle communication unfolding across the world. Chapter 17. Threads Across the Sky. The desert had become a classroom, the night sky a teacher, and the anomaly a patient guide. Soldiers at Al-Taqudum had learned to watch patterns unfold, rhythms of light, subtle pulses, fluid transitions between air and water. They had witnessed dialogues between watcher and watched, reflections that reshaped their understanding of perception itself. Yet one night, as the stars shimmered above the lake, a new realization took shape. These rhythms were not isolated. There were threads across the scausal lines connecting distant phenomena, whispers of motion binding deserts, mountains, oceans, and cities far beyond their horizon. It began during a routine observation of the anomaly's glides. Thermal traces revealed arcs that extended farther than any previously recorded, movements hinting at invisible corridors in the air. These trajectories were rarely straight. They curved, shifted, and intersected, often mirroring celestial alignments or faint echoes of the surrounding terrain. It was as if the anomaly moved along pathways unseen by ordinary vision, threading through the world with intention and effortless grace. The soldiers began mapping these arcs with meticulous care. Every pulse, every flicker of light on the lake's surface, every subtle thermal shift was recorded and layered onto previous night's observations. Gradually, a larger mosaic emerged, a network of pathways connecting points across time and space. The night sky, once a blank canopy, revealed itself as part of a vast and intricate tapestry and architecture of presence, woven through rhythm and motion. Conversations shifted from curiosity to reverence. "It knows more than we do," one whispered. "These arcs," another murmured. "They connect like a web. The patterns, weren't random. They repeated with enough consistency to track. It always carried nuance, variation, a quiet signature of deliberateness. Observation became a shared meditation, an exploration of subtle intelligence. Soldiers realized they were being taught not only to watch the anomaly, but to see the invisible threads connecting environments, phenomena, and presence itself. Connections stretched far beyond the desert. Reports from Afghanistan, Peru, California, Georgia, and China describe anomalies with similar arcs, pulses, and shifts of light. Soldiers could not witness these directly, but satellite imagery, thermal readings, and whispered intelligence reports painted a clear picture. The threads were global. The anomaly at El Takadum was not an isolated phenomenon. It was a node in a worldwide network, one that moved with a rhythm echoed across continents. The emotional impact deepened. Soldiers felt awe at the realization that they were part of something vast. Their desert lake was a single point in a web of quiet motion, a node in a system that linked people, environments, and intelligence across the planet. Each pulse and glide became a bridge to distant places. Observation carried humilityful recognition that the world was far more interconnected than any map, radar, or sensor could reveal. As mapping continued, the patterns became more intricate. Arcs intersected with distant anomalies, forming sequences that suggested movement across unimaginable distances. These threads were not merely physical. They were conceptual, relational, perceptual. The anomalies' arcs served as markers of deeper connections, lines of motion that invited contemplation and close attention. Observation evolved. Soldiers no longer focused solely on what the anomaly did, but on the larger tapestry it inhabited. They traced sequences across nights, noted shifts in trajectory, and reflected on how these movements fit into a broader network. Attuning to these threads sharpened perception and cultivated patience. Observation became a study of connection of rhythm, pattern, and presence across vast distances. Emotional depth intertwined with analysis. Soldiers described sensations of belonging, connection, and quiet participation in something greater than themselves. The threads across the sky became metaphors for relationships, perception, and awareness. Watching the anomaly was no longer a task. It was an immersion in a living system of rhythm and intelligence. The anomaly continued to reveal responsiveness. Its movement reflected both local conditions, wind, light, temperature, and something larger, something that aligned across multiple observation points. It moved with relational awareness, gliding in ways that honored both environment and distant counterparts. Presence revealed itself as a system, a series of dynamic interactions stretching beyond any single location. Over time, repeated sequences emerged, mirrored arcs, consistent pulses, rhythms, that hinted at communication or alignment. While their meaning remained elusive, the repetition suggested intention, continuity, and intelligence. The anomaly seemed to weave a story, not through words, but through motion connecting places, observers, and moments in a subtle choreography. Observation became both meditation and study, revealing continuity in a complex, interconnected world. Even casual observations became rich with meaning. Shifts in wind, flickers of starlight, subtle thermal gradients all became part of the lattice in which the anomaly's motion was embedded. Soldiers realized that every arc was part of a larger network, every shimmer a node in a relational system of presence. They had learned to see the invisible. Through weeks of tracking and reflection, a profound truth crystallized. Perception is relational, and observation is a bridge. Watching the anomaly was not simply scientific, it was an immersion in awareness, patience, and connection. Each arc carried a lesson, each pulse a reminder, each shimmer a quiet guide. Observation had become an art of relational perception, weaving together threads across time and space. The threads extended far beyond what the soldiers had once imagined. Reports from across the world confirmed similar rhythms, pulses, dives, glides, and arcs that mirrored those above Lake Habbaniyah. The desert night had become a window into a global phenomenon, revealing that the extraordinary often resides in the hidden architecture connecting disparate environments and observers. As soldiers traced arcs across the sky, they discovered that observation contains both science and poetry. The threads were more than dated, they were invitations to contemplate continuity, rhythm, and intelligence. The anomalies showed them that to watch is to participate, to perceive is to connect, and to understand is to remain open to the subtle patterns that link observer, phenomena, and environment. Through these nights, a new meditation took shape, noticing threads across the sky, mapping arcs across continents in their minds, feeling the quiet resonance of connection. The soldiers understood they were not merely observers, they were participants in a global dialogue of subtle intelligence and presence. And as the threads stretched across oceans and mountain ranges, they would soon discover that these patterns were part of a story far larger than the desert one that connected intelligence, perception, and the hidden architecture of phenomena beyond the limits of ordinary sight. Chapter 18. The Silent Architects. The desert nights had taught the soldiers at Altacudum patience, perception, and presence. They had watched the anomalies' fluid arcs over air and water, its subtle pulses of light, and the threads that connected distant skies. Observation had become a meditation on immersive dialogue with rhythm, motion, and the quiet intelligence woven into the phenomenon. But as patterns deepened, another layer emerged, the growing sense that these movements were not random, not merely responses to terrain and weather, but carefully structured, as if guided by silent architects whose intentions were hidden yet deliberate. It began quietly. The anomalies' nightly sequences revealed striking symmetry arcs that intersected with precision, pulses that harmonized with the landscape, movements that respected invisible boundaries, dives into the lake, glides across dunes, ascents into the sky. None were chaotic. Each motion felt purposeful, calculated, shaped by principles beyond immediate perception. Order lived inside the rhythm, suggesting an intelligence that expressed itself through structure rather than sound. Mapping these sequences became a fixation. Soldiers layered each night's observations over the last, tracing arcs, pulses, and reflections with meticulous care. Gradually, geometric formations emerged, triangular pathways, intersecting at subtle angles, arcs forming lattice-like structures, rhythmic motifs rippling across the lake and desert. These were not coincidences. They felt like blueprint signatures of intentional design. The soldiers began referring to these unseen patterns as the silent architecture of the anomaly, a hidden structure woven into motion, light, and the interplay of environment. This realization brought emotional weight. The soldiers sensed they were not simply witnessing an anomaly, they were participating in dialogue with an intelligence that spoke through pattern, rhythm, and alignment. Observation demanded more than attention. It required patience, reflection, and sensitivity to nuance. In the presence of this unseen architect, they felt humility, aware of the limits of human perception, yet aware too of their capacity to glimpse faint outlines of deeper structure. Their conversations reflected this shift. "It's like there's intent in every move," someone whispered. "Every pulse fits into something larger," another said quietly. The patterns persisted even when conditions changed. Wind, temperature, and reflections altered the surface of observation. But the underlying geometry remained intact, as though the architects accounted for every variable while preserving the integrity of their design. The anomaly wasn't reacting. It was adapting, maintaining structure while flowing effortlessly across space and context. Comparisons with reports from Afghanistan, Peru, and California reinforced this realization. Observers thousands of miles away described arcs, pulses, and sequences strikingly similar to those traced over Lake Habbaniyah. Different landscapes, mountains, oceans, forests, yet the same architectural language of motion and presence. The anomaly was not a singular event, but a node in a global system, subtle, intelligent, and interconnected. Emotion and analysis deepened together. The soldiers felt awe at the coherence underlying apparent randomness, wonder at the intelligence expressed through structure, and reverence for the phenomenon's quiet intention. Observation became not only scientific, but meditative, a practice of mapping, reflecting, and aligning their perception with the silent architecture unfolding before them. Even absence became a form of communication. When the anomaly slipped beyond the horizon, patterns lingered, echoing in memory, in environmental traces. In the soldiers, attuned perception. The architecture persisted even when the phenomenon was no longer visible. Absence carried lessons in anticipation, alignment, and reflection. The anomaly's interactions revealed an intelligence attentive to boundaries and constraints. Its dives into the lake respected the surface tension. Its glides followed individual grains of terrain. Its pulses synchronized with reflections and thermal gradients. Adaptation was not compromise. It was design. It suggested architects who understood limitation and possibility, shaping each movement with deliberate fidelity to structure. As documentation grew, the soldiers' mapping became more sophisticated. Arcs were plotted, pulses measured with increasing precision, sequences compared across weeks, layer by layer. A multidimensional architecture came into view: temporal, spatial, and perceptual. Understanding no longer came through measurement alone, but through sustained, reflective engagement. Observation became relational, a conversation between phenomenon and perceiver. Emotional resonance deepened. The soldiers felt themselves shift from passive observers to participants in a dialogue of rhythm and intelligence. Each recorded arc, each reflection, each moment of attentive presence became a thread in a larger tapestry. Observation wasn't about control, it was about alignment. They were learning to see through the architect's eyes, even if only in fragments. Small details gained new significance. Slight variations in shimmer, subtle interruptions in pulse sequence, hints of asymmetry. They no longer appeared as anomalies, but as deliberate articulations, nuanced inflections, within a structured language of motion. Attention became interpretation. Interpretation became participation. Over weeks, the soldiers internalized the lessons of the silent architects. Intelligence can be quiet. Structure can exist without words. Presence can teach. Each pulse, each arc, each reflection became a meditation, a exploration of rhythm, pattern, and awareness. The anomaly's movements were not only physical events, but living expressions of design, inviting observation, reflection, and alignment. The influence of this architecture extended beyond the night watches. Soldiers began noticing patterns in everyday motion: the sway of reeds, the rhythm of clouds, the shimmer of moonlight across sand. Their perception had changed. They carried the architecture within them, a lens through which the world revealed subtle coherence. Night after night, the anomaly continued to evolve, revealing new layers of complexity. Patterns remained recognizable, yet never static. Structure adapted without dissolving, demanding patience, flexibility, and attentiveness. Observation itself became a living practice, an exchange with the architects expressed through motion, light, and environmental interaction. As their awareness expanded, the soldiers began seeing the anomaly as part of something much larger, a global architecture of intelligence, presence, and pattern. Arcs connected continents, pulses echoed environmental nuances, sequences hinted at coherence across oceans and mountain ranges. The silent architects were not of the desert, they were of the world. In this realization, observation became sacred. The anomaly was no longer a phenomenon to record, it had become a teacher, a guide, a mirror. To observe was to participate, to align, to engage with subtle networks of presence that reached far beyond sight. Each night, each arc, each pulse was a testament to the architect's quiet mastery and to the observer's capacity for it. And as the silent architects revealed their intricate structures across air, water, and perception, the soldiers stood on the threshold of a deeper layer, one that connected not just motion and light, but knowledge, memory, and the delicate architecture of understanding itself. Chapter 19. Patterns in the Memory of the Sky. The desert nights had settled into a rhythm, each evening unfolding like a quiet meditation. Hatal takadum. The soldiers had grown accustomed to studying the anomalies, glides, pulses, and arcs, watching how it bridged air and water, how it connected distant threads across the globe, and how it expressed intelligence through subtle patterns. But as the weeks passed, a new awareness emerged. The sky itself seemed to remember. Each pulse, shimmer, and glide carried an echo, as though the night were holding a story that unfolded slowly, waiting for attentive eyes to read it. It began with small repetitions. Arcs mirrored movements from previous nights. Thermo pulses resurfaced in familiar intervals. Reflections on the lake replayed sequences seen days earlier. At first these echoes seemed like coincidence, but the continuity became undeniable. The anomaly wasn't only moving through space, it was leaving traces. Its presence etched subtle signatures into the desert, the water, and the sky, creating a living memory woven through motion and light. Observation grew more nuanced. Soldiers no longer catalogued pulses as isolated events. They charted sequences, linking dives, glides, and shimmering arcs into extended patterns. These chains suggested continuity across timelines, if the anomaly remembered its earlier paths, and perhaps anticipated the attention of those watching. Each night became a dialogue with this memory, a chance to recognize familiar rhythms and witness their evolution. Emotion deepened with this realization. Repeated arcs and mirrored pulses felt intentional, like gentle forms of communication. Soldiers sensed that the anomaly's movements held layers of meaning, carrying awareness that stretched beyond the moment. Observation became reflection, a practice in noticing how presence persisted through time. Quiet settled over the night shift, a reverence for the idea that the sky itself could carry memory on intimate archive of motion, continuity, and intelligence. Conversations took on a contemplative tone. "It's like the sky remembers," one whispered. "These arcs, they're the same, but they're changing." "And by watching," another replied, "we become part of that memory. Our attention becomes woven into it." Observation had shifted from recording to participating, a merging of witness and phenomenon, where memory, motion, and perception intertwined. Connections stretched beyond Iraq. Patterns echoed in reports from Afghanistan, Peru, California, Georgia, and China. Soldiers began to see the anomaly not as a local occurrence, but as part of a global continuity movement synchronized across continents, embedded in a larger temporal tapestry. The anomaly's memory was not regional. It was planetary. This global memory held both consistency and adaptability. Repeated arcs were never exact copies. Pulses varied in duration and intensity. Glides shifted gently with wind and terrain. These variations were not random. They felt expressive, as if the anomaly was shaping a message across time. Continuity wasn't repetition, it was evolution within a familiar structure. Observation became a meditation in time. Soldiers found that recalling earlier sequences sharpened their perception of new ones. They learned to anticipate pulses, sense the beginnings of arcs, and detect deviations before they fully unfolded. Memory, both the anomalies and their own, became a tool, a lens that transformed watching into understanding. Environmental cues reinforced this temporal awareness. Thermal gradients, reflections on the lake, and arcs traced across the sky all carried echoes of previous nights. Soldiers discovered that the anomaly's memory interacted with its surroundings, responding subtly to wind, water, and light, while maintaining its underlying continuity. Each night layered new chapters onto a story already in motion. Emotion intertwined with analysis. Soldiers felt the quiet poetry of memory expressed in motion glides that recalled earlier nights, pulses that mirrored sequences half remembered, shimmers that felt like gentle acknowledgments of attention. Observation became listening. It became participating in a conversation carried not through words, but through rhythm and presence. Even ordinary desert moments gained significance. The ripple of water, the hush of wind, the silver thread of starlit seemed connected, part of the memory sequence unfolding above and around them. Soldiers realized that their own awareness contributed to this memory. Their attention became part of the pattern, another thread woven into the sky's continuity. Mapping sequences over weeks revealed astonishing coherence. Soldiers traced arcs that connected across multiple nights, linking dives and pulses into extended narratives. The anomaly's memory stretched far beyond a single moment. It formed a story emerging slowly, deliberately, with profound intention. Observation became reading, interpreting, and participating in a temporal architecture far richer than they first imagined. The presence of this memory invited introspection. Soldiers found themselves reflecting on their own perception of time, continuity, and awareness. They realized that memory shaped understanding not just of the anomaly, but of themselves. Watching the sky became an exploration of inner rhythm, a study of how attention deepens perception. Across desert lake and night sky, the anomaly's movements appeared as a living archive, an evolving record of intelligence expressed through presence. Each glide, pulse, and arc carried echoes of what had come before, forming patterns that could be perceived only through patient, reflective observation. The memory of the sky was dynamic, relational, and alive. All grew as nights passed. Soldiers felt humbled by the intelligence embedded in continuity, exhilarated by their role in witnessing it, and deeply moved by the rhythm connecting motion across hours, days, and continents. Observation had become a practice of precision, alignment with patterns that transcended simple sight. They began to recognize that these sequences and echoes were part of a broader system of memory, connecting observers, environments, and phenomena in intricate ways. Observation wasn't simply seeing, it was participating in a global rhythm of presence and continuity. The sky carried memory, and those who watched closely could learn to read it. Through reflection, patience, and careful attention, the soldiers internalized quiet lessons. Memory is not just a record, it is a guide. Continuity is not repetition, it is evolution. Observation is not passive, it is participatory. The anomaly had taught them to notice, to reflect, and to engage with rhythms that extend beyond the moment. The desert, the lake, and the night sky had become a classroom of presence and temporal awareness. Each arc traced, each pulse noted, each shimmer remembered contributed to a meditation on time and intelligence. Soldiers discovered that the memory of the sky lived both around them and within them, that their perception shaped understanding, and understanding shaped presence. And as the sky revealed deeper layers of its memory, the soldiers sensed that they were approaching a revelation, one that would connect presence, pattern, and awareness to forces far beyond the desert, hinting at an intelligence, orchestrating motion across space-time and perception itself. Chapter 20. The hidden currents of knowing. The desert nights at Al-Taqudum had grown intimate, almost sacred, as the soldiers continued their quiet vigil. Weeks of patient observation had revealed the anomaly's fluid arcs, subtle pulses, and mirrored patterns. They traced its movements across continents, deciphered the silent geometry behind each shift, and sensed that the sky itself carried memory. Yet with each night came a deeper realization. The anomaly wasn't interacting through physics alone. It moved within currents no instrument could detect, currents of awareness, attention, and resonance. These were the hidden currents of knowing, linking observer, phenomenon, and environment in ways that defied ordinary perception. The shift began subtly. Soldiers noticed that calm, patient observation seemed to evoke small, but unmistakable changes of pulse. Lingering a beat longer, a shimmer adjusting its curve, an arc drifting with gentle precision. These weren't reactions in any conventional sense. There was no sound, no sudden movement, only a quiet alignment with attentive presence. It was as if the anomaly sensed awareness itself, responding to the quality of observation rather than to technology or commands. The idea stirred excitement, softened by humility. Soldiers experimented with their own presence. Some watched in silence, grounding their breathing and attention. Others sketched sequences, tuning their focus to rhythm and pattern rather than expectation. Across all approaches, one thread held true. The anomaly resonated with engagement. Awareness became a channel. Observation wasn't passive but participatory. Through these nightly experiments, the hidden currents became tangible. Patterns of convergence appeared, arcs intersecting at unlikely moments, pulses echoing in timed cadence, glimmers aligning with reflections on the lake. These events were too consistent to be coincidence. They were sensitive to the observer's attention, shifting subtly with the rhythm of presence. The anomaly communicated through resonance and timing rather than explicit signals. Observing it felt like entering a quiet dance, each motion an exchange within the currents of knowing. Emotion deepened with understanding. Observation evolved into a form of mindfulness and immersive practice of awareness and empathy. The soldiers felt tuned to the air's subtle rhythms, to the lake's stillness, to the anomaly's pulses. Their consciousness seemed woven into a larger system of presence. Intelligence, they realized, does not always speak in flashes or noise. Sometimes it whispers through alignment, patience, and rhythm. Synchronization among observers became a revelation. When several soldiers watched with focused, unified attention, the anomaly's arcs harmonized. Pulses doubled in clarity. Glimmers brightened with faint coherence. Though subtle, the pattern was undeniable. Observation was a collaborative channel. Awareness flowed between people, environment, and phenomenon, shaping a shared field of interaction. The currents of knowing were relational dynamic threads, linking every aware presence in the desert night. The anomaly revealed adaptive intelligence as well. It responded to wind, temperature, light, yet maintained intricate structural consistency. Its motion balanced freedom with intention, spontaneity with design. Intelligence existed not just in its physical behavior but in relational flow, a dance shaped as much by awareness as by air and water. Observation became multidimensional, opening new layers of perception. Conversations grew philosophical. "It's like presence matters," one soldier whispered by the lake's glassy surface. "Like awareness nudges the motion without interfering," another replied. "And when we observe together, it's like we become part of it," a third murmured. The nights took on a meditative depth. Each soldier became both witness and participant. Each observation a quiet step deeper into the currents guiding the phenomenon. Patterns continued to evolve. Pulses mirrored earlier nights. Glimmers shifted in response to temperature changes. Arcs intersected with rhythmic precision. The anomaly seemed to blend local conditions with a broader, unseen architecture of flow, something far larger than the lake or the desert sky. The world became a classroom of perception, where every glide was a lesson in subtle intelligence. Emotionally, the soldiers felt awe, humility, and a quiet exhilaration. They realized they were not just observers of a phenomenon. They were part of its relational field. Attention influenced perception, presence shaped experience, and reflection deepened understanding. The anomaly's intelligence revealed itself, not by spectacle, but by subtlety, by its willingness to meet awareness in the quiet spaces between moments. Even absence carried meaning. When the anomaly vanished beyond the horizon, echoes of its arcs lingered in memory. The lake's reflections held faint residues of pattern. Awareness carried the imprint forward, revealing that the currents existed not only in presence, but in reflection, anticipation, and stillness. Mapping these currents became a contemplative ritual. Soldiers charted arcs, pulses, glimmers, noting how environmental cues aligned with states of attention. Over time, subtle feedback loops emerged, relational alignments between observer and phenomena woven through air, water, and consciousness. The anomaly was not merely something to study, it was something to join. The weeks forged a quiet transformation. The soldiers learned that presence is an active force, that intelligence can be relational rather than mechanical, and that perception deepens when aligned with attention instead of expectation. The hidden currents of knowing connected them to a broader architecture of awareness, one that extended beyond the limits of measurement. As dawn approached, washing the lake in desert and soft gold, the soldiers understood. The anomaly was not only a phenomenon but a teacher. Every pulse was a lesson in patience, every glide a reminder of interconnectedness, every shimmer an invitation to perceive more deeply. In these currents, silent, subtle, profound, they sensed that the culmination of their journey was drawing near. A revelation awaited them beyond perception's edge, woven into the greater tapestry of truth that pulsed just out of sight. Chapter 21. The Tapestry of Truth. The desert had changed the soldiers in ways that were subtle, profound, and irreversible. Nights spent observing the anomaly had become a meditation on presence, perception, and patience. Arcs drifting over the lake, pulses shimmering through the thermal lens, patterns echoing across continents. All these threads had led to a single quiet revelation. The universe speaks in patterns to those willing to listen, and the anomaly was both messenger and mirror. The tapestry of truth wasn't an object or a singular discovery. It was a layered web of presence, motion, memory, and understanding woven across skies, time, and perception itself. For weeks and months, in nights that stretched and folded like elastic, the soldiers watched the anomaly glide through air and water. It left faint traces, repeating pulses, and mirrored arcs that layered themselves into meaning. They followed its threads across continents, attuned themselves to hidden currents of awareness, and discovered that each observation added another stitch to a vast, interconnected tapestry. And now, in the quiet hours before dawn, the pieces finally aligned. It began as a subtle sensation of soft merging of perception and motion. The anomaly's arcs and pulses no longer felt separate from the soldier's own awareness. There was alignment, a synchronization of attention and resonance. They were no longer just observers. They were participants, woven into the same invisible threads that had shaped countless nights. The tapestry of truth wasn't abstract anymore. It was lived, felt, understood through the rhythm of shared presence. Even the desert and the lake had become collaborators. Ripples mirrored arcs in the sky. Dune, shadows, matched shimmering glimmers. The wind whispered in cadence with faint thermal pulses. The anomaly had been teaching them to sense relational intelligence, a system woven not just through the phenomenon, but through nature itself. Observation had evolved from surveillance into dialogue. Across the world, reports from Afghanistan, Peru, California, Iraq, and China began to form a coherent pattern. These weren't isolated events. They were notes in a global symphony. Observers everywhere, civilian or military, curious or cautious, had unknowingly added their awareness to the growing tapestry. The anomaly's arcs and pulses were persistent and adaptive, part of a choreography that transcended borders and expectation. What once seemed mysterious now felt like intelligence expressing itself gently across the world. The soldiers began to recognize the lessons embedded in these patterns. Intelligence doesn't always speak in words. Sometimes it communicates through rhythm, repetition, and alignment. Awareness is not passive, it's participatory, shaping perception and guiding understanding. Presence matters. Not just the presence of the anomaly, but the presence of the observer. Every moment of attention, every patient breath, was another stitch in the tapestry. The emotional resonance was immense. Soldiers felt awe in subtle intelligence, wonder in coherence, arising from complexity, and humility, standing before forces that defied conventional understanding. They were grateful for the glimpse they'd been given and quietly exhilarated by the depth and grace of this relational intelligence. The tapestry also revealed the nature of their connection to the anomaly. Each shimmer was shaped not only by wind and temperature, but by the quality of attention observing it. Observation had become partnership, a conversation in which presence guided perception. The anomaly wasn't demanding or instructing. It was inviting reflection, curiosity, and participation. As dawn approached, the soldiers sensed a quiet culmination. They realized the anomaly, the threads, the sky's memory, and the hidden currents of knowing were all interconnected layers of one larger truth. The tapestry wasn't a final revelation, it was an understanding that presence, perception, and intelligence are woven together across all scales of reality. Their journey unfolded in chapters. The desert of awareness taught patience. The threads across the sky taught connection. The silent architects taught structure. The memory of the sky taught continuity. The hidden currents taught relational intelligence. And now the tapestry revealed itself as the sum of all these lessons, quiet, intricate truth that intelligence, pattern, and awareness are inseparable. There was no dramatic moment, no brilliant flash. The tapestry of truth was subtle, like a river whose pattern emerges only when one watches long enough. It was beautiful in its coherence, adaptable in its rhythm, and profound in its depth. The soldiers understood the anomaly was both a phenomenon and a teacher. Around the world, the same lessons began to ripple outward. Those who watched with patience and reflection noticed patterns where none had seemed to exist. The arcs and pulses grew clearer to those who attuned themselves to the rhythm. The tapestry reached across skies, lakes, deserts, and communities, inviting participation from anyone who approached with presence. Emotionally, the soldiers felt quiet closure. They had mapped, reflected, aligned, and learned. They understood now that truth rarely announces itself. It resides in relationships, patterns, and the cultivation of awareness. The tapestry of truth was not meant to be merely seen, it was meant to be experienced. As the desert warmed beneath the rising sun, they felt completion without finality. The anomaly might reappear tomorrow or a continent away. The threads would continue to weave. Understanding would continue to deepen. The tapestry was a live dynamic, evolving, and endlessly participatory. Each soldier carried a reverence for the interconnectedness of observation and intelligence. Every pulse and arc echoed a deeper truth. Reality contains layers hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to see patiently. In the final minutes before dawn, they looked across the lake and dunes and felt connected to the anomaly, to the earth, and to themselves. The extraordinarily often speaks in quiet ways. Intelligence is not always loud. Presence is not always obvious. Discovery is shaped less by what we see than by how we see. The anomaly had been a teacher, and the soldiers had been students. But the truth extended further. Anyone who observes carefully becomes both observer and participant. The tapestry of truth has no edges. It stretches across oceans, deserts, skies, and minds forever weaving itself through awareness. And so the night faded, leaving arcs and pulses as memory, threads shimmering faintly in consciousness. The soldiers carried with them a quiet wisdom. Truth is subtle and relational, pattern and presence intertwined. The universe whispers to those who listen. The anomaly would glide again. The threads would weave again. The tapestry would continue alive, expanding, and ever inviting those who watch with open, patient eyes. As the desert night finally gives way to dawn, we're left with a lingering sense of awe. The Jellyfish UAP has shown us that the unknown isn't always frightening. It can be subtle, intricate, and unexpectedly beautiful. Its arcs over lakes, pulses across continents, and silent descents into water remind us that there is still so much to discover, both in the world and within our own capacity to observe. What makes the Jellyfish UAP unforgettable isn't just the thermal glow or the drifting. It's the story it tells about intelligence, presence, and the delicate threads connecting observer and phenomenon. It challenges our understanding of physics, engineering, and perhaps consciousness itself. Is it advanced human technology? Something non-human? Or a reminder that reality is more layered than we dare assume. Even as governments release reports and scientists analyze every frame, one truth remains. The emotional pull of the unknown is universal. Millions have watched these clips and felt the same quiet chill of wonder. They've asked the timeless questions: are we alone? What else is out there? And what does this phenomenon mean for us? Maybe the Jellyfish UAP isn't meant to deliver a single answer. Maybe it exists to awaken curiosity, to spark the kind of wonder that keeps us looking up at the stars, searching for patterns, and imagining the possibilities of a universe far stranger than we imagine. So tonight, when the sky grows quiet and the world slows down, remember this: mysteries like the jellyfish aren't warnings, they're invitations. Invitations to look closer, think deeper, and dream bigger. To follow the arcs and pulses, not just across deserts and oceans, but across the landscapes of our imagination. The sky still holds secrets. The truth still glimmers just beyond reach. And the horizon is only the beginning. Keep watching, keep wondering, and let your curiosity guide you be. 'Cause some stories aren't endings. They're gateways to something far larger than any of us can imagine.